choosing their sporting Mount Rushmore. Some decisions are easy.
And I was seeing teachers who had never expressed any emotion whatsoever lose their mind when Sonny was running in that home straight, trying to catch that goal spot.
Others are controversial.
Mayo's greatest celebrity fan now helps him earn his place on Mayo's Mt Rushmore is Kevin Kilbane.
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
George O'Connor, 17 summers in purple and gold.
And catch the live decision-making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
It is Wednesday, the 22nd of April, and you're very welcome along to OTB AM. We're here with you every morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10 o'clock. We're extending the show for the duration of our lock-in, which, as we've all heard over the last 24 hours or so, has been officially extended until at least the end of August. Not the full lock-in, obviously, just the absence of mass gatherings, which it seems is something that, we're going to miss a lot. So we kind of knew this was coming from the bits and pieces that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks on the show. We had Alan Milton on talking about what the GAA thought was going to happen, and he didn't sound particularly hopeful that there would be stuff happening over the actual summer. And, I think everybody's been making these contingency plans. We had Luke O'Neill on last week, and he was saying that sport will come back in a very different way from what we knew at Professor Sam McConkey's interview in the papers today, talking about how social distancing will effectively prevent any form of contact sport from happening until such time as we have treatment or vaccine. And that's exactly the message that we've been hearing for the last while. But when it's written down in black and white and the government officially says that's it for mass gatherings under 5,000 until the end of August/September, then everybody's like, oh, so if the pall of depression is hitting you this morning, fear not. We have plenty of good quality content coming your way, including Kenny Cunningham's Culture Hall of Fame. Kenny Dalglish's Culture Hall of Fame will be something whenever we finally get him on to tell us what box set it was that sustained him during the time that he was recuperating from COVID-19. But no, it's Kenny Cunningham today. It's going to be just as exciting. We'll also talk about the impact that the absence of sport is going to have on sponsorship in Ireland with a couple of key people from the sponsorship industry a little bit later on in the show. And more importantly than that, we're getting to the bottom of who will actually be on the mountain in Limerick when it comes to their Mt Rushmore. All of that coming up. Jack Anderson and Neil Tracy are doing that for us. All of that coming up in just a little while. First, though, let's bring you the very latest from Paul Rouse, who is continuing his lecture series on the history of sport. Essentially, it's the history of sport in Ireland. So this is the lecture series that you would have got if you'd got the points to go to UCD to do history and had been wise enough to pick his course. Instead, we're giving it away free, gratis, and for nothing to you, our loyal listeners and viewers. So enjoy this for the next half hour. See you soon.
Okay, so that's what's happening in public schools, and it varies from pitch to pitch and geographically and culturally. But there is a sort of a field game, a hybrid of football and rugby ongoing. You mentioned the 1850s. I know in your notes as well, you said from about the 1850s on, we start seeing the first football clubs in London, certainly.
Yeah, so what happened was, as these boys who liked playing football in the schools, football and various sports became central to the code of these schools. So to play for the school team became a big thing, and there was a bit of an idea that you would. It was a kind of, there were two things. It was godliness and good learning and sport were all wrapped together as a character building thing in the idea of these schools. And of course, these boys were meant to go out and serve the empire. This was utterly crucial to the idea of Englishness, and then of Britishness, and then to the empire. That you've heard that phrase repeated about the playing fields of Eton being utterly critical to the establishment of the empire and the winning of battles and everything to do with that. But when these boys went out into various places, they took their games with them. There were obviously the boys who were made play and who hated it. And then there were those who loved playing sport. and didn't think that just because they turned 20 or 21 that they should stop playing. So those who went on, the elite few who went on to university, to Cambridge and to Oxford, began to play games together. And they tried in the 1840s to get a combined set of rules and came up with the Cambridge rules. Now, there were disagreement between the various people who came from Eton or Harrow as to what those rules should be when they were there. They all believed in the prestige of their own public school. But so it didn't really take off, those Cambridge rules of the 1840s. And then when people went on into London in the 1850s, they set up clubs such as Blackheath and Richmond in the 1850s, and they each played by their individual rules. And when they came to play each other, they either played by the rules of one of the clubs, or they kind of combined their rules for a game on the day. So into the 1850s, there were more and more football clubs being established, each by their own set of rules, and there was no combined set of rules for all of these schools, or for all of these clubs.
Which brings us to 1863 and the Football Association. This is the FA as we know it, is it?
It is the FA as we know it. The first meeting was held in the Freemasons Tavern in London on the 26th of October, 1863. A group of people from the schools and from the existing clubs around London only came in here, and they established, in a series of 5 or 6 meetings over the next 2 months, what became known as the Football Association, which they agreed was the Football Association. And there were disputes as to what the nature of this game should be. And it came down to 2 basic things. Was this game going to be a catch and run game? And most games in all the public schools involve handling of the ball. So it was a feeling that it should be catch and run. Or should it be a dribbling, kicking game? So should the ball either be on the ground or should it be in your hand and you running with it? So that's the first divide. And the second divide was whether hacking should be allowed. Now, hacking was a practice which developed in rugby school as one thing. And hacking is basically involved the deliberate kicking in the shins of your opponent. So you're coming forward with the ball's on the ground, you're rushing it forward as part of a ground, and I let fly, whether the ball is near you or not, and I just let fly at your shin. I mean, there was a certain etiquette to it. You weren't meant to use your heel when you hacked the other person, and you weren't meant to kick above the knee. But this was pretty physical, and there was a view that that's one thing if you're a schoolboy and not able to go to class the next day. But if you're meant to be going in to a courtroom, or you're meant to go in to be a doctor into a surgery or whatever, it's slightly different. If you're unable to walk, it takes it out of it. So, and in the original rules that they formulated for the Football Association on the 1st of December, you could actually run with the ball in the hand. That was the draft rules.
Right.
But then over the next, something happened in those meetings. It's not quite clear exactly what happened, but it was decided that no, ultimately we're taking out running with the ball in the hand, and we're taking out hacking. So these rules.
Is that where, as a historian, you just have to say, well, something happened in those meetings, we don't quite know what?
There is a dispute over it, and there is no shame in people saying there's a capacity, there's a pretense in history that you must offer a neat explanation for things. And the minute you hear a neat explanation for much of history, the alarm bells should ringing. Number one. Number two, one of the most difficult things I think in history is to work out the motivations for why people do things and what pushes them to do things. It is the great challenge of history. Now, you can ordinarily, or in very many instances, assess the evidence and make a very strong case for doing this. But the capacity of people to misremember, to invent, and to outright lie as explanations for why these things means we must be cautious as to why things happen. So, the FA, in its first published rule book, decided you could catch the ball if it came to you, but you must drop it immediately and kick it. You couldn't run with it.
Right.
And number one. And number two, you were not allowed hack. You could not deliberately kick in the leg your opponent. And from these and around these rules, the Football Association was formed. And immediately there was a split.
Oh, was there? Okay.
So immediately there were a group of clubs that said, look, this is absolutely outrageous. And one man, Campbell, who was representing one of the London clubs who declined to join the Football Association, gave that ultimate insult to Englishmen and said that, look, if if you want to invent a game like that, sure, even Frenchmen could come over and beat us. If you don't want to, if you're going to take all the manliness out of this sport.
Yeah.
And so there were a group of 20 clubs based around who were used to games in which you could run with the ball in your hand and you were allowed hack, who basically said, no, we're not joining this. Off you go. Good luck.
Right. You know, it's interesting, the hacking thing, like that has survived in the lexicon to this day. I mean, it is still common terminology. If we're playing football, bad tackle, and you'll say he's after hacking me.
Absolutely. And the idea of a player being a hacker, and also the idea that there are not too many teams win championships without having somebody who can do a small bit of hacking remains the case.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So the manly clubs go off and continue their hacking and catching the ball. So the FA rules, as in you can't hack and you can't handle the ball, they obviously continue. Does this thing explode? Like, does the gospel spread pretty immediately from 1863?
I think one of the interesting things about soccer is, if you look around the modern world, it is, and you're interested in sport, and you see the ubiquity of soccer, you would almost imagine that it was inevitable.
Yeah.
That this sport is so popular. It is the global game, the people's game, the beautiful game, whatever cliche people want to put around it. And it's hard to imagine a sporting world without it. But the truth of it is, there was nothing inevitable about this progress. There was nothing inevitable about the idea that soccer would thrive or triumph or even survive at the beginning, because through the 1860s, soccer really did not spread, or the Football Association did not spread its rules beyond a core group of clubs who were active in the London area. And by 1867, there were fewer than 20 clubs who were, and you think of the size of England at this stage, more than 30 million people living on the island and Britain in general, and the population growing year after year. And there are fewer than 20 clubs who give their affiliation to the Football Association and play by the rules. And it comes to the point where there is consideration given to disbandment of the Football Association, and that its rules might die.
Wow. Well, then, you can explain to me then what happens here, or in so much as you can, because I know from the notes you sent on, the FA Cup of 1871, FA Cup, 15 teams, a measly 15 teams in 1871. 7 years later, in 1878, there are 43 teams in the FA Cup. And then 1880s, simply you have written down explosion. So something happens.
Yeah, so something happens, and it's a reminder that the capacity of people of wealth and money to write history means that for very many years, this English game story of this being the game of the English public school, which was then given to the working class man, because of course this was all about men. There was no idea that women would play, or no suggestion that women should play in these games at this stage. But the idea that this was a game handed down from the betters to those who were in the lower strata of society is, of course, a nonsense once you look at the details. And there's an excellent historian, Adrian Harvey, who works in England, who turned this narrative on its head. And he very clearly showed the other traditions, him amongst others, have shown the other traditions of play in places like Cumbria, across Scotland, across the north of England, where football did not die as it was supposed to have done in the post-industrial revolution, or the industrial revolution period in England, that there were the older traditions of playing were still there. And those clubs who played set up their own rules. So, for example, you have Sheffield's Football Club, founded in 1857, had its own rules, which were written in 1858 and spread across Yorkshire.
Okay.
So they had their own games. And by 1867, there were 14 clubs involved in the Sheffield Football Association, more than 1,000 players. And they were modifying the rules to draw in some clubs and all of that. So there were other traditions. There was not just the London Football Association with everything that was given down from the elite down. It was much more complicated than that. So a couple of things happened. How did it come to pass that the Football Association came to dominate? And you focus on two basic things. First of all, the establishment of the FA Cup, in no particular order, the establishment of the FA Cup in 1871 really mattered, because it gave initially a small focus for a cup competition for which clubs could enter. It gave a structure in which it wasn't just random matches. I challenge you, I challenge you, and whatever. So that was the first structure, and that was competitive. And I'll come back to why that worked in a second. But the second thing is the London FA and the Sheffield FA, they began to pull closer together. They played representative matches against each other in the end of the 1860s and into the 1870s. And this began a process in which the Football Association and its rules spread out of London and into other areas. And during the 1870s, by virtue of that spread and by virtue of the FA Cup, you just got a sense of a momentum building around a competition and around a structure of play and around a set of rules in which it became a badge of honour for an area to have a soccer team and to enter that soccer team in a cup competition. Yeah. And how that worked was then you get local football associations being established in places like Birmingham in 1875, Staffordshire in 1877, Surrey in that same year of 1877, and then in Lancashire, crucially, in 1878. And each of those local football associations set up their own competition. And clubs began to be founded by people who already played football to enter in these cup competitions. So you get clubs set up by local grandees, I say factory owners, set up clubs like Blackburn Olympic. Schools set up their clubs, came out, Blackburn Rovers and Chester City. Churches were involved in the founding of clubs like Everton, Wolves and Birmingham City. Cricket clubs set up football clubs for their players for the winter, like Aston Villa. And then there were a whole host of clubs which were formed around pub teams, around streets, and just by people who worked together and by groups of friends. So it just gathered slowly, steadily through the 1870s. It gathered a sense of momentum. And then by 1880, such was the interest, the newspapers were getting involved in covering these games. And it became a thing to go and watch your local soccer team playing in a cup competition. Yes. For the first time ever that this happened.
Okay, very interesting the way that momentum kind of just kick-started in a big way. And in the 1880s, the style of football that we're seeing, like, this was not tiki-taka.
Oh no, this was, there's a brilliant etching of, there's a brilliant etching of a match played between representative teams from England and Scotland in the 1870s. And there was a debate over whether this was actually rugby or soccer, because the ball in both games will often be spent on the ground between a clump of players who are pushing and shoving against each other and trying to drive the ball in a different way. And the idea of forming a wedge and driving the ball down the field in your feet in a cluster of 8 players, so soccer might have been 11 aside, and it might have been played in the goals, and there were corners, throw-ins and everything like that. That's all true. But the players were not spread out in what we consider to be modern positions. There might have been a couple of people hanging around the fringes looking for a handy ball, but the great bulk of players were in the middle at this stage, driving the ball up the field. And there was a sense of individualism in all of this, and players were there to prove who that star player was. So Alfred Littleton was one of the star players of the 1870s, and he was asked after an England-Scotland game why he never passed the ball to anybody, why he never kicked the ball. He tried to rumble it at his own time, and he says, "I'm playing purely for my own pleasure, sir." And it's this idea that of individualism, the idea of tactics and all that, is something that came in the 1880s. And it was the arrival of Scottish players down into England which began to transform that game, at least in some part.
Right. So the Scots were tactically ahead of their counterparts.
It is one of the really interesting things of soccer in Britain, the extent to which the game spread really quickly in Scotland at the very beginning, taken on by Queen's Park, who were avowedly amateur, and then spreading around the rest of Glasgow and Edinburgh, which of course was really thriving still at this point as a country. And for almost the first 100 years of England-Scotland soccer matches, basically from the early 1870s to around 1970, England and Scotland were more or less level on head-to-head contests. The idea there was a parity there between them, and the Scots developed their own particular style of play in this earlier period, and they were fated for the fact that they were more tactical. They did try and pass the ball out. They expanded their team. They moved into more specialised positions rather than having a rut of people pushed around the middle, and this helped spread the game as well.
Okay. And so just to kind of double back for a second, and we have, you know, the lads from Eton who set up their own teams and when they're adults, and then we have the factory workers playing games and the you know, different classes. So are they mixing? Are they playing each other in the same games? Is this, you know, is it still very much divided along class lines? How's all that developing?
The great thing about the FA Cup is that everybody was in the same competition at the same level, and it became a thing to be able to have a really good representative team from your area compete in the FA Cup. And it was clear that there was a balance of power shifting, because in the early 1880s, the number of people who now come to watch soccer matches, for the first time, people coming to watch football matches rather than actually playing. It's part of that whole commercialization of sport, driven by capitalists who wish to make money out of people going to watch games. People begin to charge others in for playing the games. And of course, it's a matter of civic pride. The newspaper industry is dramatically expanding in the 1870s and the 1880s. Many more people can read the newspaper. So they're reading about these people who are playing football, and then they wish to go and see the game.
Yeah.
And then they're advertising them, and then there are reports, and it begins to spin on itself. And people begin to build bigger grounds that you can charge into. There's only a couple of thousand people at the first FA Cup final. It's by the 1880s, it's climbing to 15, 20,000 and continues to climb. So it became a thing to go to these games. And of course, it became a thing to win in front of a crowd. So the rise of the working class team, as told in a cartoon way by the English game, is a real thing.
Right.
And I suppose the great example of working class teams is Blackburn Olympic from 1883. It was a team who, the first probably working class team who really won the cup, and it was founded and funded by the owner of the foundry. And on that team were 3 weavers, a spinner, an iron worker, a cotton machine operative, a picture framer, a master plumber, a clerk, a dental assistant, and a publican. So these were at least the nominal professions of all the people who played the game. And they reached the final of the FA Cup in 1883,
right,
where they played the old Etonians. As the name would suggest, these were former students of, at least largely, of Eton School. And on the Eton School team in that same FA Cup final were a group of lawyers, churchmen, a baronet by the name of Percy de Paravenici, and a professor of Latin. Now, as someone who works in the university, professors of Latin are not renowned as sporting greats, but this was a clash of cultures during this period, and the game ended in a draw, and in extra time, Blackburn Olympic won 2 goals to 1, and this was the dam break of working class teams winning the competition. Now, it's too easy to say it's working class fee, just working class fee toffs. There's too much of a mixture around. Somebody had to own those teams. They weren't just all straight out of the mines onto the playing field and so on. But that contest was definitely there in the early 1880s.
And so then with all this money swirling around and this increased interest, how quickly before players stopped working in the factories and just became pretty much akin to full-time professionals? When was that official?
Well, it didn't happen quickly at all. From the late 1870s, it was clear, and certainly by 1880, 1881, it was clear that factory owners, mill workers, various other people were encouraging others to come to their club, giving them handy jobs, paying them boot money, a few pounds thrown in there. Yeah. And basically, there are stories of players jogging out onto the field wearing one jersey, and by the time they get to the field, they're in another jersey because they've been bought on the way out, and so on. But more ordinarily, it's players, it's more subtle than that. It's players being enticed to live in a particular area, being given additional money, being given a handy job. And that grew in 1882, 1883, and it was clear by 1884 that it was rampant. All across the north of England, it was clear that the most successful teams, essentially, they might have been using devices such as testimonials, or there might have been just under the cover payments or or whatever. But it was clear that the very best teams across the north of England were almost all paying their players in some form or other, not least because there were 55 Scots by 1884-85 season down playing in the north of England.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
This is OTB Sports Radio, Thursday Night Football with John Giles.
When you lose a big match like that, you have to suck that up. But to go into a dressing room and say you're celebrating to it, disrespectful. I mean, who is Mourinho to talk about disrespect?
The best analysis of all the week's football from Ireland's #1 football man.
Pogba's a social media star, right? He appeals to the young people now. He does his dance, he has his hair and all that. That's all he's worried about, in my opinion. Not worried about being a great player, Nathan.
John Giles, every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the Go Loud app.
OTB AM.
Right, you're very welcome back to OTB AM. It is 7:55 on Wednesday. It is Wednesday. Yes, it is Wednesday, the 22nd of April. Thanks very much for that. If you want to get involved in the conversation this morning, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Of course, you can always use the hashtag OTBAM. Owen, good morning to you. How you doing?
Good morning, Ger. What's the crack?
Bit of intramural shade being thrown there by Paul Rouse in our last piece, calling into question the prowess of the Latin scholars. It did strike me while I was listening to that if I'd had Paul Rouse as a history teacher at some point along the way, I've no doubt that I would have been more interested in history. Is there any way we could appoint him like the nation's history teacher?
Well, the issue there is that everybody would then become history teachers, and we would have an overload in the history economy in Ireland, and nobody would want to do any other job. We would have an under-resourced economy in every other department because everybody would want to be a history teacher. We would have 5.5 million wannabe history teachers, I think, if Paul Rouse was the nation's history teacher.
Well, you obviously love football, but there's no sign of you becoming a coach, Owen. So it doesn't automatically follow. You'd just be wiser in your day job. You would know, for example, that Tyrone were the team for the decade. The first decade.
That's just a weird tangent. I don't know. Maybe we all secretly want to be football coaches and we just can't. And that's my point. Maybe we would all want to be history teachers, but just can't because people like Paul Rouse are going to be too good for us to get it. Okay. What was the exact shade he was throwing there? I didn't catch the full piece.
He was saying that Latin scholars professors of Latin aren't always known for their sporting prowess.
It's harsh.
Anyway, let's move on because there's lots to get to. We're going to read you the sports news. We're going to tell you what's coming up in a moment. We've got to talk about the big breaking news overnight, obviously, Owen. It's not the fact that the country won't have any sports until September of any meaningful certainly in terms of contact. But it's that Rob Gronkowski is out of retirement. He has quit the WWE and he is back playing football if there is football again. Maybe this is a publicity stunt for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Maybe there's not going to be any football. Who knows?
Yeah, I would be surprised if Tom Brady was in the business of doing publicity stunts that don't actually benefit his football team, because this is clearly a Tom Brady move, isn't it? He's picked up the phone to him and say, he's not coming out of retirement, first of all. He is switching codes from champion wrestler, let's not forget, he won a title there a couple of weeks ago, to potential Super Bowl winner again. That's what Rob Gronkowski has done. The WWE, the big losers this morning. I'm surprised actually that Patriots got something for him. I was like, I didn't realize that's how it worked. I thought that retirement meant that you were no longer an asset to your previous team, but obviously he had a couple of years left on his contract. Yeah, 2 years left. So last year, which he didn't play and didn't get paid for, and then this year, which obviously they had to release him essentially because he said he wanted to go, and they got a reasonable amount for him. A fourth round pick is not nothing. Some good players emerge in the fourth round, but so the draft is today's Wednesday, tomorrow's Thursday. The draft is tomorrow night. This is like one of the sports that seems to be quite happy to progress with no real sense that no, everything's fine, it's all going to be grand. We're going to start our games in late August, early September, and Super Bowl's going to go ahead next year in Tampa, and we expect full stadiums the whole way along. Yeah, obviously the drafts will be done virtually, and I don't know, you'd have to think that there's going to be a little bit of skullduggery done between now and the first pick of the draft if it hasn't already been done. Like, if you're operating in $1 billion industry like the NFL is, have you already broken protocol to secretly meet a potential pick to see? Don't they have to give him a quick physical, just see he's in the shape that he says he is, for example, when you want to pick, especially a high round pick in the draft. I'd be surprised if things aren't being flouted already. It's too expensive and too rich to not be to not have people bending the rules in some way. As regards to the season, who knows? Like, I mean, Donald Trump obviously needs to watch his television, and he needs to watch his America's Game and all that sort of thing. So if he's got anything to do with it, there probably will be an NFL start date that resembles previous years.
If you're not cheating, you're not trying, essentially, is what you're saying, right?
Basically, yeah. I'm sure there are plenty of secret GMs in PPE driving around the country talking to kids that might be prospective draft picks. But of course, they're only going to the grocery store to pick up essential items.
Yeah, they don't have the 2K radius thing, but if they did, it would be like, oh, my GPS got lost there on the way to the store for whatever it is that they buy in the store in those brown paper bags. 8 o'clock this morning, the FAI said they need to speak with the HSE to gain clarification regarding mass gatherings. Events involving more than 5,000 people have been banned until at least August 31st. The FAI said they need to host international games in September, and they've been told by UEFA that the Nations League is due to start. The interim CEO, Ger and Eoin, also feels the 5,000 limit could provide a glimmer of hope for the League of Ireland. The proposed takeover of Newcastle has a new objector. Qatari broadcaster beIN Sports has written to the Premier League and its 20 clubs asking them to block the sale to Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince. Amnesty International have also written to the Premier League highlighting Saudi Arabia's poor human rights record. But beIN is almost 1 year into a 3-year deal worth €566 million to England's top flight clubs, and they are locked in a bitter diplomatic dispute in which beIN are basing their objection. But they're also saying that Saudi Arabia is the source of a lot of piracy. So if you are watching an illegal stream of a Premier League game, beIN Sports are saying that there's piracy going on, and that some of that piracy would be the ones that you're watching. The season's Eredivisie is over. Football in the Netherlands has been banned until September the 1st as a result of the pandemic. The Dutch Football Association, the KNVB, will meet with clubs to discuss the ramifications of their decision to end the season. When play was suspended, Ajax topped the table on goal difference from AZ Alkmaar. That'd be a very big club thing to happen, going into a battle slightly ahead on goal difference, and you win the season, as opposed to it being split or shared. Could they do that? Would a shared championship be a thing? Could it?
I think it definitely lessens the significance of it, doesn't it? Shared anything in sport is probably not how something wants to go. I would say a lot of people would just rather something is called off and no winner is decided, rather than to have to share a trophy with somebody.
They share the ashes, don't they? Do they, or do you retain the ashes? Do you retain? It's the same as the Ryder Cup, is it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I certainly have heard the word retention used around the ashes. But anyway, that's the ashes. Like this is the different stuff. Like I mean, like we're even retaining the idea of that has a sense of pride around it. Sharing, it just doesn't work. It just does not work. There's no point playing it in the first place if you're going to end up sharing a competition with somebody that you might win if you don't win, sort of thing. That just kills the whole purpose of sport.
You're channeling your inner Michael Jordan there. In racing, organisers hope this year's Galway Festival can happen behind closed doors. They announced that it wouldn't happen, obviously, in the aftermath of the mass gatherings ban, that it wouldn't get underway as normal, but they do hope that there is some possibility that the races themselves might take place. And the Galway Race Committee say the meeting would not have been possible with fans present. In American football, as we've already said, Rob Gronkowski is 30, turning 31. Been retired since last March, but he will play alongside Tom Brady in New England. In Tampa, if any games actually happen. And it's funny, wasn't it, in Tampa where the WWE was that the part of Florida that they were having their behind closed door stuff? That
I think so.
They were the ones who were declared as essential workers in all this.
Well, is Rob Gronkowski in Florida not a terrible mix? Isn't that like the place where people tend to go on spring break and really enjoy themselves in the United States? I'm not like, New England seemed suitably boring for somebody like Rob Gronkowski, and to be able to control his talents. I'm sure when you've got Tom Brady there as your quarterback, he's probably going to keep him in line, and that's the reason why he's coming back. But I'd say Florida will provide a fair few distractions for him, and it could be an interesting season.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I hope that there's a Keeping Up with the Kardashians-style reality TV show that I would happily... They should start it now, because I would happily pay my $9.99 a month or whatever it costs. 4 minutes past 8, here's what's coming up on the show this morning. I'm going to get into the newspapers for you in just a second. The main feature that we're doing today, obviously, is the Mt Rushmore for the county of Limerick. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes' time. I think it's fairly straightforward. It's going to be some modern people, some old people, and then some historic people. That's like... I mean, I know that they think they're a county of great sporting prowess, but are they? Have they enough people to keep this going for? We've got a full half an hour scheduled for it, and surely they're not going to take up. Are we going to take the full half hour?
I will. I'll let the people of Limerick respond to that. I genuinely thought that. Yeah, it's like. Well, okay. So let's. If you want to break it down per capita, it does it provide the same kick that say Cork has brought us? No, but Cork is probably going to say that it's the greatest of all time, sort of thing. But no, it's got a good spread. I still think though that you've got a couple of definites. And then outside, I think you've got two definites really when it comes to this Mount Rushmore, and it just depends where Jack Anderson is leaning, which way Neil Tracy is leaning to kind of pick up the rest. Like Neil's a big rugby man. I wouldn't be surprised to see 2 rugby heads.
4 rugby heads, I'd say.
4 rugby heads.
I wouldn't be surprised. Or 1 rugby head done 4 times. Later on after that, we have Kenny Cunningham inducting something into our Off the Ball Culture Hall of Fame. British comedy came in for a bit of a kicking last week, essentially from yourself and Stephanie Preisner.
Although, well, you know, you're just happy enough to just have somebody on the piece who's actually, or somebody that you know better to actually don't have to blame. It was obviously Stephanie who did most of the blame, but it's okay. You can point a finger at me if you want, and we can get into that later.
There's definitely a strand of British comedy that's rubbish, that is vastly overrated, and we'll talk.
So you're saying
we'll talk a bit about some of them today. Like, is Gavin and Stacey not shite? I mean, is that not? No. Emma's saying no. Do you think it's good?
I don't know. Like I've seen bits and pieces of it. I saw the episode of Christmas. It's grand. Like it's fine. Like some people find James Corden hilarious. Like the fact that I think British comedy is funny, but it's not hilarious. I think that is usually the going rate. There's just so much of it, and so much of the stuff that looks the same when you turn on Gold on a Sunday afternoon. Kenny Cunningham, however, will disagree vehemently with that.
Every week we're going to do a piece on how the business of sport is dealing with what's going on at the crisis at the moment. And Jill Downey, of course, sponsorship, and Mick O'Keefe of Teneo are going to join us around about 9:40 this morning to talk to us about how the industry is responding and what trends are beginning to emerge. And we'll keep this going over the next while, just as a means to let everybody understand a little bit about the plates that are shifting in the background and the pressures that the sports organisations are going to come under from their sponsors and from their broadcast partners to try and get something up that resembles a product that we all used to know. And that's obviously the main source of the newspapers, which we'll get into now.
OTB AM.
Right, offtheball.com is shootings and stabbings were around every month. This is Aidan O'Brien speaking to Joe last night on the football show, talking about making it around Millwall. And then championship hopes dwindle as mass gatherings banned until autumn. That was the news, obviously, that broke yesterday afternoon around about 4:45. Accrington player banned for 8 games after calling Paul McShane a racial slur. Rob Gronkowski out of retirement to join Tom Brady in Tampa is a story we've just spoken about. And Paul Rouse debunking the William Webb Ellis myth. Again, this is the whole it was just an ad campaign, I think. As far as I remember, it was Visa around the time of a World Cup, who certainly helped to propagate the myth that William Webb Ellis picked up the ball, ran with it at rugby, and the sport was invented. It's a brilliant creation myth and not true, apparently. So that's offtheball.com for you this morning.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with Dr. Sam McConkey's comments around contact sport being a long way off. Warren's leading expert is the headline there. And Ian Nasewa says, I'd love to go back to Dublin and coach Leinster. So this is former captain Ian Nasewa admitting that, of course, he'd relish the chance to go back. Just to get into some of the quotes, it's Cian Tracy's piece here this morning. He says that, would I like to coach Leinster one day? Absolutely. I would love to. When that time will be, I just don't know. But it's not the last time we will be in Dublin, that's for sure. I'll never say never. We love Dublin. We love Ireland. We love Leinster. And the main picture there on the back page of the Irish Independent this morning is Nissen Christensen, Red Bull Salzburg, Danish defender, wearing a protective mask as his side returned to training in Austria yesterday.
I don't think there is a player in Leinster's history that is as much of a cult hero as Issa Nasewa. Obviously, Rocky Elson completely won the hearts of everybody with his sensational play over the course of 1 year. And I don't know, have we done a Classic Game Club where we've looked back at the Champions Cup final that Leinster would make the breakthrough? We could do that entire season and just do the performances of Rocky Elsom as the entire Classic Game Club, because he's man of the match, quarter-final, semi-final, final. And like, anyway, he just looks like a big kid playing football with a bunch of 5-year-olds, because he's that different against the Leicester pack that was the backbone of the England team that won the World Cup. And so obviously high watermark for Issa to come in and over a period of time take. But certainly the best. And like reading that this morning as a Leinster supporter, you're like, wow, that'd be amazing. That'd be great. Even if he was just around the place. And I don't know if there's many people in any other... I don't know. I don't know that many people who have that kind of impact.
Yeah, like I'm not sure. Like he's obviously gone back home, has he? And he's not.
He's in New Zealand
at the moment.
Yeah, no, he's not. Yeah. He's not coaching it.
So like, it'd be interesting to see if they actually managed to create something for him. Given it's a fairly stacked coaching staff at the moment, it would be something that Leinster fans would obviously love. He's a hero, and I think really it is Rocky or Nasewa as definitely the. They're beyond cult heroes at this point within Leinster fans, but I think within Irish rugby perhaps they're cult heroes. Like you have people naming their kids Rocky and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like sorry, cult. It's not a cult. It's kind of like I imagine it's how you would feel about Maurice Fitz when you heard Maurice Fitz was involved with the senior inter-county team. How did that make you feel?
Yeah, amazing. Like it's you want to see those people back involved, and if they manage to bring success, it just feels sweeter. It's almost like an extension of the squad. You're like, I'm really happy for the bunch of players and also for that particular coach who is obviously a legend.
There's a warm and fuzziness about it. The Irish Times this morning, they've got mass gatherings are who we are, losing them feels surreal. It's Malachy Clerkin's thought piece, obviously written quite quickly on Deadline last night, and it's a great piece this morning. FAI to seek clarification on mass gatherings from government. And then there's a picture of Kevin Cassidy being shouted at by Jim McGuinness. Now, this is the time when they're obviously still mates and things are still going okay for them. Former Donegal chairman breaks silence on McGuinness and Cassidy rift. I don't know where he's been speaking.
He's been speaking. I think it's just the Irish Times actually carrying that piece this morning. I'm not sure. You might be able to correct me there. I read it on the Irish Times website this morning, and basically the former Donegal chairman speaking for the first time about this said he organised a meeting between Kevin Cassidy and Jim McGuinness after their fallout. They met for 2 hours, and by all accounts, the meeting seemed fairly productive. Jim McGuinness came away happy from it. Kevin Cassidy says he came away happy from it. It was all very well-mannered, according to this piece, and Kevin Cassidy said he would make his decision about whether or not to come back, and he declined the invitation to come back into the squad.
Right. At its height, it was the Donegal GAA version of Saipan, which is about... It's pretty accurate. Although you'd say McGuinness was better at managing than Mick McCarthy was in their respective fields. And Cassidy not quite at Roy Keane's level, but like super important to that team. His point against Kildare was kind of the high watermark of his... it kind of distilled his entire career down to this. So the game is over. It's at the end. Everybody's exhausted. It's a shattering physical exertion that they put the team through. And he's got the brains, the skill and the balls to go for a far-out point to win a match in extra time. You're like, wow, this guy, he's got something about him. That is the Irish Times this morning. Examiner next.
The Irish Examiner leads with clarity sought over plan to limit crowds to 5,000 people. So this is kind of the next step. Will there be, this is on kind of two different levels. You've got the FAI talking about their potential League of Ireland season and also upcoming Nations League / European qualifiers. And then you have the GAA grounds as well about whether or not they'll be able to play games in sub 5,000 capacity arenas, or whether or not they'll just have to start planning for behind closed doors, because you wonder if this is going to be a stepping stone. What was announced yesterday, you can kind of see why they needed to get ahead of things, just to stop the likes of Electric Picnic happening and giving them a few months to prepare, stopping things like the All-Ireland football semi-finals and hurling semi-finals happening within the next couple of months, and to ensure that those things, there's no notions of those. I don't think anybody reasonably believed that we would have packed stadiums for All-Ireland semi-finals before the end of August, or finals really, because they would have been moved forward. But I think just yesterday kind of puts a pin in any sort of fanciful notion that we would. So the question is now, will it be safe to play under 5,000 people stadiums, in under 5,000 seater stadiums? And then also the deadline of September, does that get pushed back and back and back? You suspect both things will happen, that the number of 5,000 will get lower and the date will get pushed back as well. Players would play if deemed safe as well, says O'Donoghue. That's the other story here in the Irish Examiner. That's Will O'Donoghue of Limerick saying that if they were given the assurances, they would play. FAI warned the devil is in the detail, writes Liam Mackey. And Michael Moynihan is asking, is the government slowly preparing people to do without sport?
Yeah. I don't know. We'll get to Sam McConkey's piece. We'll talk about all the implications of this at the end when we take you through the rest of the paper headlines. Block Saudis Newcastle bid, says TV giant. This is the Times of London. Martin Ziegler has this, and it is an exclusive. Yusuf Al-Obaidi, the chief executive of the BN Media Group, says in the letters, the danger of allowing the acquisition of a controlling or material interest, whether acquired directly or indirectly, in a major Premier League club by what is effectively the Saudi Arabian government cannot be ignored, given the country's past and continuing illegal actions and their direct impact on the commercial interests of the Premier League. So BN Sport maintains that there is a pirate channel in Saudi Arabia which is broadcasting games illegally in Saudi Arabia. And obviously, BN Sport pay hundreds of millions every year for the rights to broadcast these games and essentially to make money off the back of them, and they're not being allowed to do so. So maybe there's a way here for the Premier League to say, ooh, we really like the cut of your gym. We'd love to give you one of our clubs, but unfortunately we can't because you're in dispute with one of our broadcast holders. Obviously, Amnesty International writing to them and saying the Saudi government should have nothing to do with the Premier League team doesn't seem to have had any impact with the Premier League at the moment. So it will be interesting to see if this has, this is going to hit you in your pocket, or else Saudi Arabia government just decide to pay for those rights themselves.
Yeah, could happen. Probably have a few pennies. Irish Daily Star this morning leads with no season in the sun. Westlife cash lost another blow to GAA. Prospects of a 2020 championship look bleak. Tottenham Hotspur are going to come back as the fittest club in the Premier League, no question. Spurs pair run into flack. You've got Serge Aurier and Moussa Sissoko training together yesterday. Posted on Instagram, which obviously not the smartest decision in the world. Pochettino is the headline here, which has been doing a story which has been doing the rounds quite a bit this morning, that Mauricio Pochettino could be in line to be targeted by Newcastle United as their next manager. And FAI seek clarity on comeback. FAI CEO Ger and Eoin last night expressed hope that the League of Ireland might resume ahead of the autumn, but added that he wanted clarification from the government regarding international matches. So obviously yesterday's announcement would be that there will be a ban on mass gatherings of over 5,000 people until the end of August. That was aimed at non-sporting events such as concerts as well as sporting events. But FAI officials are eager for talks on how the international team, which is set to return to action in September, will be affected.
Back page of the Daily Mail this morning is clubs cast off, provincial games cancelled in GAA fixtures reshuffle. So this is Michael Clifford and Shane McGrath, the story. The Provincial and All-Ireland Club Championship will not take place this season. Haven't seen this anywhere else. GAA bosses advised County Board yesterday that planning for the Provincial Club Championship was not part of their contingency plans in the event of restrictions being lifted to allow club activity resume. But the prospect of the Inter-County Championships being played in 2020 have receded significantly too after the news yesterday that 5,000 people will be banned from gathering until August at least. Does having no provincial and national club championship, if there are club games and everybody wins a county championship and there's county championships, it would be really disappointing if you were the county champions this year and you didn't get the chance to go forward. But ultimately, everybody's going to have to make some accommodation here. If there was any possibility of playing club championships, I think that'd be great, right? People would be happy enough.
Definitely, yeah. Just anything really, if there was a safe way to get that back on the pitch, people would take it. I guess does that story preclude it from potentially finishing back in its old date in a couple of months into the following year? I think it's just talking about the within a calendar year sort of situation. So who knows what might be able to kick down the line as well. The Mirror this morning, the Irish Mirror leads with Ozils in isolation. Pay cut rebel Mesut left out on his own as Gunners aim to persuade two other stars to slash wages. So this is, I haven't seen the names of the other two players at Arsenal who have declined to take their 12.5% pay cut, but Mesut Ozil is certainly one of them. Pochettino, same headline. Newcastle owners want Maurizio going. Galway races is off limits. Going. Irish clash finished, asks the Mirror, and gone a GAA season in real peril. The Galway races will go ahead behind closed doors. Whether or not the GAA will remains to be seen. Football, you would have thought, would be the most likely sporting event to go ahead behind closed doors over the next couple of months.
The Telegraph for you this morning: Spurs face new shame after Pear's video post. Not the smartest group of footballers, it turns out, at Spurs. Doing things and then catching yourself. Arsenal players pressurised into agreeing pay reductions. It's funny how Spurs are outrunning and doing that stupid thing, and the Arsenal players are still the only ones that I can see coming under any pressure for pay cuts. Has everybody else taken pay cuts? Is that why it's not an issue? I don't understand why. It was just Arsenal really bad at managing publicity.
I think the Arsenal situation was as much to do with performance as it was to do with COVID-19. Their pay cuts were regards to whether or not they finish in the Champions League. So you would take your 12.5% pay cut, but you would have a restoration if they were, say, to qualify for the Champions League. And even if the season doesn't resume, there was some talks this morning that Arsenal may qualify for the Champions League in a completely different way. That there's talks of a UEFA coefficient being used for next year's Champions League qualification if seasons are scrapped, which is obviously ridiculous. If you're going to have to use something that if the season is called off, surely you use current Premier League standings rather than your actual UEFA coefficients.
I mean, that would seem to make sense. There was at least some competition involved in the last 12 months for that. But OK, next.
The Guardian this morning leads with Mo Farah's tribute to Neil Black, the former UK athletics chief, died suddenly yesterday. So heartbroken Farah leads tributes after a mentor's death. And Spurs players sorry for ignoring coronavirus guidelines is the headline on that one. A couple of other things from The Guardian. Amnesty says Premier League risks becoming a patsy, and why Trump's grand plan for golf is way off target, writes Andy Bull.
The back page of the Herald. First contact, we're a long way off return for team sport, warns virus experts. So this is Professor Sam McConkey, who has been speaking with Conor McKeown, and they've got a good Q&A in where they just outline exactly what is likely to happen. So it's literally question answer. It's worth getting your hands on today if you can, where he's asked about what the conditions, the prevalent conditions would need to be for sport to return in the way that we are used to having seen it in the past. It needs a vaccine, it needs PEP or PrEP. So he's talking about how the suppression of HIV has happened, which is PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, and PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. So essentially these are antiviral drugs that you take either before or after exposure to the virus, and unless we have that for COVID-19, or unless we have an elimination strategy like they've had in New Zealand, where he actually predicts that there will be rugby in New Zealand as early as August, which would be great because then we can all watch rugby in New Zealand, get up early. Maybe they'll put it on a little bit later for the rest of the world too and increase the audiences globally. But we're all going to get significantly into how the Crusaders are going against your boys, the Wellington, whatever they're called, Owen.
Oh, I am on the Wellington, whatever they're called, and I've always been a fan, and Wellington, whatever they're called till I die.
So look, this is essentially saying that it would be very unlikely that we'll have contact sport again for the foreseeable future. He's very, very positive about running, very positive about cycling, very positive about golf to a certain extent, and singles tennis, single-person sailing as well. So, you know, I mean, we're good at single-person sailing. We could all watch a lot of that this summer. Good vantage points up in the mountains. We're an island nation. Mm-hmm. It's always been our calling to eat more fish. Don't know why we didn't eat more fish throughout history, and to sail boats.
Like, are you suggesting that all people who sail for Ireland are automatically pescatarians or something like them? I'm sure that they eat other things. Like, absolutely, it's something that could happen. Like, the golf is one of the things that, while it's easy to point at what, say, the PGA Tour has done in terms of its public utterances over the last couple of weeks, it's easy to point a finger at them and say that's disgraceful, and clearly they are nowhere near the top of the priority list if there is any shortages of COVID test kits. And of course there is a whole Donald Trump element to it, but a sport like golf does make sense as one of the first things that might come back because of the nature of the game, because you can practice social distancing. And really, let's face it, Ger, like, I mean, the players aren't going to complain that much. like people will say, oh well, you imagine Tiger on the last day of Augusta last year without the fans. Like, of course, it's a different thing, 100%. But as a television spectacle, is it like, does it change that much as opposed to say the big cheer after, say, a goal is scored, for example? If you're watching football on television, I certainly feel it's much more jarring watching those behind closed doors football games as opposed to, say, turning on the web.com tour and there's nobody watching the golfers, and even on some of the European tour events where there's nobody watching, it actually doesn't seem that strange. So I think it ticks all the boxes, really, as something that could come back. Sailing is something that you mentioned there as well. Like a lot of individual sports are very, very possible. Like athletics and cycling, though, is kind of a different ball game because people run in bunches and it's very, very hard to stay distant. But the likes of golf and those on the sea sports, definitely you could see coming back. And then when it comes to the geography, like obviously New Zealand's been, obviously they've done a fantastic job in how they've reacted to this. They are helped though by their geographical location, and as a result, you're right, we're going to see them back quickly. I'm trying to look through the football teams as well to try and get on the bandwagon of someone. I don't know, maybe Auckland City till I die, perhaps, in the football league.
Oh right, so for their soccer teams.
Yeah, I think semi-professional club based in Sandringham in Auckland. You know, they currently compete in the ISPS and the Premiership, the highest level of domestic football in New Zealand. So I just picked one. They've actually got a good international field to their squad. They've got 3 Spaniards. They've got an Egyptian footballer playing for them, a Croatian, Mario Bilan is his name, and their captain Angel Berlanga is playing for them. I'm trying to see if there's any
related to the Wexford Bilans and the Dublin Bilans.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Tall Croatians, you know. The Bilans quite tall as well. So, to go back to this though, like it is devastating that they're very unlikely until some major breakthrough happens. And look, again, we continue to make this point. Luke O'Neill was quite positive last week about how the entire weight of the world scientific community are working on these scenarios at the moment. So that would give you some hope, but at the same time, the brutality of the announcement yesterday saying, right, that's it for mass gatherings under 5,000, so over 5,000, has certainly left a bit of a pall of depression over the country this morning.
Yeah, I think that there are so many people who just, their life and certainly their weekends revolve around sport, and if it's not sport, and gigs, sporting gigs, like sport and music are 2 of the most important things in this country in terms of recreation. There's no getting away from that. And when I mean recreation, I don't necessarily mean going out and playing. Thankfully, there's a huge portion of people who do that, but there is also a huge portion of people who just gain their recreation from going to gigs and from going to games. And those 2 things have certainly had a pin put in them. Like even just speaking from music's perspective, that is one thing that is probably the very, very, very last thing to come back, because you can't put those behind closed doors. If you put them in certain arenas with safe social distancing, the arena won't be able to make enough money because there won't be enough people through the door to actually pay the band and all that sort of stuff. So that is the very, very last thing to come back. At least with sport, we have some sort of semblance of being able to watch this thing on television that isn't a million miles away from how you would ordinarily consume it.
Yeah, you do wonder if there is some way of getting some number of people to venues, if bigger venues now have a slimmed down restriction. So, say a venue like Vicar Street, for example, has about 1,200 capacity. If you were to put 300 in there, I know you're talking about the profitability or being able to turn the lights on. I don't know. Is there a way that you can have 300 people spaced? Is there any point to that? I mean, there might be for a comedy gig, but for a music gig, yeah, where it's actually the whole point is that you're going with the intention of, you know, feeling the energy of the crowd as much as the energy of the band, and the energy that the band gets off the crowd being energized by the fact that they're like it's a perfect virtuous circle when it actually works as an entertainment or a cultural moment, and to strip that away and have kind of I'm self-consciously cheering here as like I'm 2 meters away from everybody around me.
Well, like, you know, it's interesting. For comedy, you could definitely do it. But I wonder, is there a sort of comparable situation where people who have like tickets to gigs would be saying right now, no, I don't want to go to a 1/3 full Vicar Street because, as you say, it's not going to be the same energy. It's kind of the same as when we listen to footballers say we don't want to play in front of empty stadiums. And we kind of sometimes tend to scoff at that, saying, well, it's not up to you. It's actually kind of important. And I'd imagine that sort of energy that you get from going to a gig is a fraction of, but still similar to what sports people get in terms of playing in front of full stadiums. It's an entirely different ball game. I don't know.
Last point on this, though, it's getting to that point where Davy Fitz said, if it's this or nothing, what do you do?
100, but like that's the question, and we all know the answer to it. Like we all want it back, and it will do good things for people watching it. And like even if they just want to say now safely, we want to wait till after the sub 5,000 gatherings or the 5,000 plus gatherings is restricted. Even if they want to just kick things back to beyond the end of August, I don't think people will have as much of an issue with that as long as there's a bit of definition around it. And I say a bit because who knows if this gets kicked back again and the deadline gets extended. But yeah, like Davy's right. If it's between those two things, you're always going to take the empty stadium instead of nothing at this point. All
right, 8:29 this morning. Over the next while here on Off the Ball, we're going to be checking in with athletes from around the country and asking them how's the head. We're hearing how they're coping during this crisis, what they're doing to keep their mental health in order, and to find out what advice they found useful from their sporting careers that served them well during this stressful time. We'd love to hear as well how you're getting on. You can WhatsApp us 087 9180 180. What's keeping you sane? What's got you through the last few weeks? And how are you going to get through the next few weeks as well? You can use the hashtag How's the Head as well. So yesterday afternoon, Will O'Callaghan caught up with Deirdre Duke, World Cup silver medalist with the Irish hockey team.
So far, I've been okay. I suppose some days, you kind of feel like you're in somewhat of a routine, and then other days it's a bit more difficult to kind of get your rhythm. But so far it's okay. I've kind of just been training away, and it's almost nice. It's been nice to have a little bit more time than I usually have because we've always quite a busy schedule. So so far so good, but it's kind of day to day, isn't it? For a while there before it kind of, the so-called lockdown kind of came, we were still getting out onto the pitch in UCD just to have a hit around and kind of run together. But then obviously, with the new measures and social distancing, we've kind of, obviously I haven't seen any of my teammates in a number of weeks now. So in terms of training, I kind of managed to gather a bit of a makeshift gym before kind of everything kind of really stopped. So I actually don't have a bad setup at the minute. I have a barbell and a few weights, and my brother used to use a few. So there's a few around the house. And then just running on the road, running on, I was down in UCD running this morning on my own. So it's kind of just doing what you can. For the last, I'd say 6 months, we've been pretty much semi full-time. We see each other 4 or 5 times a week. So going from training in that kind of environment with, others pushing you constantly, and, we had a lot of contact time. It's definitely been a bit of an adjustment to training totally on your own. I suppose in the past we had a bit more of a remote program, and we used to do a lot of training on our own or in small groups. So it's kind of just trying to find that motivation from like we had, a couple of years back. And yeah, just try and keep focused on, obviously next summer, and tick away as best you can. We have like weekly Skype meetings with our staff, going through video clips, and working through the program. We still have to upload all our data in terms of our GPS and monitor our wellness every morning. There's probably going to be a little bit of a break now at some point, just, I suppose a bit of headspace from the pressures of the programme before we kind of hopefully ramp it back up, once things settle down. Reading a lot, I go for about 3 or, before we were only, I suppose the measures came in, I was doing a lot of walking, trying to get as much fresh air as I could. And it's funny, you kind of just find ways to occupy yourself, around the house, things that haven't been done in a while. You kind of just find things to do, it seems. Practicing kind of mindfulness is something that our coach Sean has kind of introduced us to over the last number of months. So, trying to get that headspace and practicing things like mindfulness, yoga, and getting your daily walk in is huge for your mindset, and just kind of stay a little bit grounded with all the madness.
How's the Head there with Deirdre Duke from the Irish hockey team. You can use the hashtag How's the Head to get involved in that, or you can always WhatsApp us 0879 180 180. It's 33 minutes past 8 this morning, and it's time for us to get to Limerick's Mt Rushmore. Jack Anderson is going to sit in judgment on Neil Tracy. The rules are fairly simple. It took us a couple of weeks to establish these, but somebody comes along from our team and puts up 4 people on Mount Rushmore, and our special guest gets to change at least one of them. Only one of them, I'm being reliably informed. Neil Tracy, good morning to you.
All right, lads. How's it going?
Good. Jack Anderson, is it late evening where you are? Is it 8 o'clock in the evening?
Late evening, 5:30. Yeah.
5:30. Okay, so not too bad. And how is life down under at the moment?
We're the very same as you. We're in lockdown as well. Australia's doing quite well though, really, overall. So they may relax the restrictions soon enough, and we may see sport in Australia back sooner than elsewhere.
They were kind of the last ones to go. I remember sitting and watching the start of the new AFL season at home and gathering the kids around to kind of say, this might be the last bit of sport we watch for a while. 9 o'clock on a Thursday or Friday morning, it feels like years and years ago at this stage. Are they talking about potential dates for getting contact sport matches back?
Yeah, they are. Well, the NRL, which is rugby league, has already said, end of May, which is way too optimistic, but there's various commercial pressures on them. And the AFL, which is the one you really look at, are talking about July, but they will be behind closed doors. There will be a lot of government regulations surrounding them. They'll probably put them in kind of quarantine hubs, if you like. But commercially, even though they're very strong, they're on a knife edge. And there's also other issues to do with entertainment on sport and all that as well. But we think maybe end of July. Not so sure about rugby union. Rugby Australia could even go insolvent soon, so that could be an issue. And cricket is in trouble as well. So it's, that there's obviously the public health issues, but there's the commercial issues before we even think about getting back to play.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, obviously the global pandemic is important, but on the totem pole of what's important, we all know that Limerick's Mount Rushmore is way more important. Neil Tracy, this is the most pressure you've ever been under in your entire life. Where are you starting us off, sir?
I think we'll start off with a couple of bankers. When I sat down to, I suppose it was probably this day last week around that, Tommy got in touch to say, will I be doing this on Wednesday? So immediately I was the names were running through my head, and I found, in my opinion anyway, I filled up the first 3 of my spots fairly easily. And I was thinking, do you know what, this is actually fairly straightforward. Then the last of the spots, I had maybe 2 or 3 people in mind, and we'll get to it later, but I actually ended up going with someone completely different, based off the feedback I was getting on tweets over the last couple of days. But the first one I think we're going to start is a pretty easy one. He was one of the names that was on pretty much everyone's list. There were 2 names that seemed to be on almost everyone's list. So the first one I'm going to go with is former Munster and Ireland captain, 2-time Heineken Cup winner, 3-time Six Nations winner, 3-time Lions tourist, Paul O'Connell from Young Munsters in Limerick.
I don't think anybody can disagree with this one. I haven't seen anybody not have Paul O'Connell on their Mount Rushmore straight off the bat. Jack, this is very straightforward. No quibbles with this, I presume?
No quibbles at all, and a ginger as well. So, yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're on to that one. Yeah, good. Yeah.
My concern here, Neil, is that we've given you this responsibility, and obviously everybody knows that you're a rugby man, and we might have 4 Paul O'Connells, or we might just have 4 rugby heads.
I don't want to give the game away too much, but I will tell you this is the only rugby player on my list of 4 anyway.
Okay.
So, that's actually a big enough decision.
It is, yeah. But it was the easiest one I could put on anyway. I just think when Paul O'Connell was at his height of fame and his height of his powers, I would have been mid-late teens. So you're talking when Munster were winning their 2 Heineken Cups in 2006 and 2008, and when he was first made his when he was played the first 2 of his 3 Lions tours in 05 and 09. I think that's when rugby in Limerick as well was probably peaking, when Munster were at their best. And I think he was just the player in it that epitomised everything, particularly from a Limerick point of view. He was hard, tough, uncompromising, but yet he was just an absolutely fantastic, skilled player. And I think those people who would know about his background as well know he was not just a phenomenal rugby player, but he was one of those kids growing up that was just gifted at everything. He was a brilliant golfer, a brilliant swimmer as well. And I think when I was putting this list together, what I had in mind for what I envisaged the Mount Rushmore to be. Now, I know other people might look at it differently as well. I didn't necessarily want it just to be, the four greatest Limerick sports people. I wanted it to be the four Limerick sports people who resonated with the city and the county the most. The four people that people think of instantly when they think of sport in Limerick or sport in whatever county as well. And for that reason, he was probably the easiest selection there was. I think particularly in Limerick as well, when Munster rugby took off, you're talking the early 2000s, and it was pretty much the noughties when Munster rugby, the bandwagon itself was as, it was moving on and it was as full as it was ever going to be. And, I think in large part of it is down to the way Limerick was at the time. I think for a lot of Limerick people in particular, Limerick had a very bad reputation. There was, a lot of crime. There were gang wars going on, and the Munster rugby bandwagon at the time, having so many people on it as well, it gave people in Limerick a chance to really, really be proud of something, where for quite a long time there wasn't a huge amount to be proud of, because they were getting battered left, right, and centre in the press with the trouble that was going on in the city. And anytime Munster were playing, and anytime someone like Paul O'Connell was there at the forefront leading with Ireland or on the lines, it gave Limerick people a chance to puff their chest out and show to everyone, this is what Limerick City is. Forget about all that other crap that's going on. This is what the real Limerick is. This is what Limerick people love. And in particular as well, this is the man who kind of epitomizes all of it. I remember being, I think it was 16 or 17, and myself and a few of my friends, we were out in the gym in UL doing a bit of a session. And this was back in the time when a lot of the Munster players, they didn't have their high performance centre out there. A lot of the players were just coming in and out of the gym as well. And we were standing at one of the racks doing a few squats and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, we kind of turned to the right, and who's standing there? Only Paul O'Connell. And I mean, for 4 or 5 Limerick rugby mad, 16, 17-year-olds, it was like God had just walked up and was doing squats beside you. He walks over at one point, and he kind of points to one of the plates, and he was like, lads, any chance I could use that? And I don't think any of us actually even responded. I was just staring up at him going, yeah. So, no, I just think he was probably the easiest selection on the list. And I think for what he did for Limerick at a time when it really, really needed a boost, I think he was a pretty easy selection to make.
Let's move on to the hurlers, right? Because I'm wondering, did Cian Lynch come in for consideration on this as the embodiment of a long hurling dynasty, where you also get a bit of Kieran Carey in the 90s? If you pick Cian Lynch now, he was hurler of the year, and it's like the very definition and the essence of what it means to be a modern superstar, introduced to the team very early on in as a teenager, as a forward, but eventually developed into one of the best midfielders of his generation. Was he in consideration here at all for you, Jack?
Yeah, I didn't kind of consider current players, which is maybe I'm wrong on that. I mean, with hurling, you have to start with Mick Mackey. You just have to. There's just no debate over that. He's our ring, he's our record, he's our raging bull, he's everything. 3 All-Irelands, 5 National Leagues, multiple club championships with a hand. Mackey is, everything that is the epitome of Limerick hurling. He has to be on. So I mean, I'm just going to walk away if Mackey's not on it. So that's it. After that, in terms of hurling, you probably go with Eamon Cregan, really, because, when kind of Limerick comes out of a bit of a doldrums in the 60s, Cregan is there. He's there in 73. He moves back to centre back and wins it. He's just tremendous in 73. For some reason, the 73 final is often on All-Ireland goals. And just watch Cregan. He's also there in 1980 when we give one to Galway. He's corner forward. He's absolutely superb. Anyone who's played will have seen him coaching. He's coached up in Mary I until recently. Cregan is, I think there's a story that I don't think he was at actually the final against Galway. I think he had to leave. He was watching it at home or something. He had to leave because it meant so much to him. And I think, when it comes to hurling, he probably meant so much to us as well. So Cregan would be strong. And then Ciarán, of course, as well. The point in 96 against Clare when we beat Clare. Can I say that twice? When we beat Clare. And when Ciarán scores the point. Unfortunately, there was no All-Ireland in 96. I don't think it was played, so we'll just move on. But Ciarán is there. Ciarán, 9 county championships. So he's very strong as well. There's 3. And we could name a few more, but those 3 will do. But Mackey, number 1.
Okay, that's fair enough. And I think there's consensus on this as well, Neil, right?
Yeah, Mick Mackey and Paul O'Connell were like first 2 on the team sheet for me, and I would say for Jack as well. And for most people who got in touch with me, Paul O'Connell and Mick Mackey were right top of the list. To go on and look at the other hurlers as well, like you mentioned, Cian Lynch. I was humming and hawing maybe about someone like Cian Lynch. I think his story is really only starting. I know he's kind of been around on the scene for a good 5 years now at this stage, but that was just because he broke through so young. I was a bit wary of including guys that are still playing on the list because I just wanted to give them the chance to go on and fulfill their career. And who knows? I mean, we could be building another Mt Rushmore in Limerick in 20 years' time. We're adding on a couple of names. Hopefully, we're not chiseling off anyone.
That's how it works. There's only room for 4. There's no.
Okay, well, we'll just have to wait until there's a big scandal and chisel off a face or something like that.
So, for the avoidance of doubt and any future administrative errors, because there was one significant one last week where, anyway, we won't rake over old coals, but this has not been a straightforward process in many of the counties. You, Neil, as our representative, you're going to pick 3 and then you're going to pick 4 actually, but Jack has the opportunity to change your last one. So your 3 that are locked in stone, your third one, who are you giving us?
My third one that's locked in stone is Andy Lee. So I would talk about Andy similar enough to the way I spoke about Paul O'Connell, that when he was coming through 2004 Olympic Games and going through and during the noughties, particularly as well when he had a couple of fights in Limerick in the University Arena. Just like Paul O'Connell, there was a sense that this is Limerick being up on the big stage once again and being able to be really, really proud of ourselves. And to see him go on and win a world title, I think everyone in Limerick was just so delighted that he was finally getting a chance to do that. And the fact as well, I think if you're looking for a barometer for someone to have an official welcome at Shannon Airport to bring home a world title, I think that's a nice little box to be able to tick off to, to confirm your place on
Donald
the
Trump had one at Shannon Airport, I'm fairly sure, or was it Knock? I don't know. But so let's just we should be, I don't want to, I'm not saying Andy Lee and Donald Trump, but I'm just saying.
I'm talking strictly sports.
Okay.
But yeah, oh God, you ruined my point there now, Ger. But it was such a pity that fight against Billy Joe Saunders didn't get to go ahead in Thomond Park, because that just would have been such a brilliant occasion for the people of Limerick to be able to see it. And I know for Andy as well about how much it would have meant to him to be able to defend a world title in his home city. But yeah, I think he was a pretty easy choice to make as well for me. He didn't make everyone's list, but I think just about when I was setting out my criteria of who are the people you think of when you think of Limerick, who are the people that resonate with the people of Limerick, I think Andy Lee is up there, and he's making my list.
I think in terms of, to help bolster the argument, I think in terms of the achievement in a sport which is practiced everywhere in the world, like boxing is legitimately a global sport, You can see it in the Olympics, but then you can see it particularly in the professional ranks. And for Andy to have the career that he did, and to reach the high heights that he did, and for him to be continuing now that career, I think there's going to be a really interesting second chapter where his coaching comes to the fore. He has just masterminded the heavyweight champion of the world becoming the heavyweight champion of the world, like, which we didn't even talk about there, but like, you know, there is definitely a second element to this that's going to develop into the future. And I really think anybody who makes it in football, again, because everybody in the world kicks a ball as soon as they can stand. Anybody who makes it in running should also be highly considered. And I noticed that Frank O'Mara hasn't come up in your conversations.
Yeah.
But certainly there was...
Frank O'Mara come up. Yeah, Frank O'Mara is a world champion. We also have Sam Lynch in rowing, a world champion as well. So there's 3 world champions for you. Andy Lee, obviously a great amateur as well as a professional, and around the middleweight division. So that's, as competitive as you get in world boxing. So yeah, but just to mention that Limerick had 3 world champions, just to mention there in one breath.
Again, yeah, and no harm ramming the point home. But okay, so they're your first 3, and now we get to the contentious point. Who is your 4th, Neil? So Paul O'Connell's guaranteed, Mick Mackey's guaranteed, Andy Lee is guaranteed. This last one, Jack is going to get the opportunity to change this and swap somebody in or out. So who have you got for us?
I am going to go, after a lot of consideration, my final choice is going to be for soccer. It's going to be former Limerick and Waterford player, but Limerick native Al Finucane. So Al Finucane, he was a Republic of Ireland international and had a staggeringly long career with in the League of Ireland. He is, from what I could find out anyway online, he is the official all-time League of Ireland appearance holder. He's got 600 and I don't have it in front of me. 600 and something appearances in the League of Ireland. Played for 27 seasons, well into his mid-40s. Ended up playing in the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup at the age of 43, which is, from what I could find, it's still a record for the competition. And he wasn't someone that I was seriously considering initially. But as I said, I threw out a tweet on Monday to kind of gauge opinion and stuff. And I was absolutely blown away with the amount of people who were putting Al Finucane on their list. And as I had previously said as well, this is the list I was putting together was the 4 people who I felt were best representing, the opinion out there, who were best, resonating with the people. And for simply that reason, I had to put him into my list.
Okay. You got bullied into it, I'm hearing.
Not so much. I was open-minded. I was open-minded going into it. Initially, I had been considering either Eamon Cregan or Kieran Carey for it. But yeah, my mind just got swayed over the course of the last couple of days.
What about Steve Finnan, lads? Asks Jim Keown, born in Limerick, moved to England when young, a great right back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on Steve Finnan, like, I think the fact that he left Limerick so young, he probably doesn't stick out so much as to the people of Limerick so much. Like I only got a handful of people actually calling for Steve Finnan, and obviously he has achieved way more than I would say any Limerick player has in the game of football. But I think it's just I think it's the lasting impact he has on the city itself is why I would be choosing someone like Al Finucane above Steve Finnan.
Jack, who have you got for us?
So I went through. It's funny with football, with soccer. Even though participation-wise, it would be one of the biggest, in the city, particularly in the city. Al Finucane, I would have had him. Steve Finnan's record, obviously, at the elite level is and there's others like Don Givens, etc. In that. But so football, it's a strange one, that one, really, for Limerick City. It's a very strange one. Al Finucane is kind of our Beckenbauer, if you like. That's who we would go for. Generally, on the 4th one, I was ready for Neil to have all sorts of rugby ones on. So I had a bit of a short list on that. Hear me out on this. I went to school with him, but John Hayes was the first person to get 100 caps for Ireland. So very popular figure for lots of reasons. Joy Neville, Roisin Upton from hockey, Joy Neville from rugby would be some of the names you take into account. But if I was coming down to the fourth one, and this goes back in history, but there's a Limerick guy who won 3 Olympic gold medals in a row. JJ Flanagan in the hammer throw won 1900, 1904, 1908, representing the US, but look, take that. But 3 Olympic gold medals. I don't want to put you in any controversy, but there's only one other Irish person who won 3 Olympic gold medals. And that's just stop. And that's an outrageous achievement by Flanagan. It's such an achievement that we actually won another one in 1920, a guy from Palace Green, Paddy Ryan, but we probably don't have time to mention that. Flanagan goes on, he coaches O'Callaghan, who wins 2 more gold medals. JJ Flanagan is Irish sporting gold.
Well, look, we had the awful situation where Nathan Murphy completely boobed on the very first one of these, where he left off somebody else who'd won a bunch of gold medals, also representing the States from Mayo, and you're like, here, come on. I mean, either this has some credibility or it doesn't. So, Jack, this is your call. This is your spot on the mountain. Is this your final answer?
Final answer is JJ Flanagan, has to be.
Neil, I don't think you can complain too much, can you?
No, I can't. He was someone that I had been kind of, had down on the long list of names as well. And who can possibly argue with 3 Olympic medals? But the reason I would have, edged for someone like Alpha Nukin or the other people on my list is it was specifically the criteria I was putting down when I was making the list myself. It was, who are the names that are jumping out to the people of Limerick. There are probably a lot of Limerick people who don't know the story of John Flanagan. And look, maybe this is a brilliant place to actually tell that story, to have him up there and people go out and look at it. And, you can have a little plaque there.
Where? That's the question. That's the last question that we need to settle on. And my topographical, if that's even a word, knowledge of the hills of Limerick. Whereabouts is this mountain being chiselled?
It's up in the Galties, Jack, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, the thing about Limerick is, the thing about Limerick is that the city people think our big enemy is Clare, which is just nonsense. The number one sporting rivalry is with Tip. So I want it up on the Galties, so they have to look at it every day. And if we could get JP McManus to sponsor it, we put floodlights and everything on it. So those 4 on the Galty Mountain. There's our motto.
That sounds like a worryingly realistic prospect, actually.
Here, look.
Let me work on that one.
This is a great idea. If we get one actual Mt Rushmore out of this and it's sponsored by JP, we'll be happy. We can retire happily at that point. Lads, that was great. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Neil, I don't think there's going to be too much controversy about this. Jack, that was an excellent choice. A little bit of historical context, and hopefully we mentioned everybody who deserved a mention. I know the runners are going to be disappointed that Frank O'Mara didn't get more of a shout because he was a world champion in a sport that, again, literally everybody on the planet can do. So the backlash from the athletes will be long and lasting, but we can take it. That is your Limerick Mt Rushmore. Thanks, lads, and best of luck. We'll talk to you again soon. Right, so what are we at here? 8:57 this morning here, and I've got to tell you a couple of things about what's coming up here. So this Friday here on Off the Ball, we want you to join us in supporting those in the front line by dressing up for Formal Friday. That's right. It's time to get up and get dressed. No more shorts all day. We want to see you running your 5K in your tux. How many keepy uppies can you do in your wedding suit? Maybe you can just work from home in your wedding dress. Post it on social media with the hashtag Formal Friday, and then get on to offtheball.com/donate to help raise funds for our frontline heroes. We're all going to be getting involved here on Off the Ball. It's for a great cause, so get on to offtheball.com/donate for more information. Just coming up to 9 o'clock this Wednesday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. We're not done yet. Kenny Cunningham is going to join us in the next hour for the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. We're going to be talking about Kenny's love of British comedies, so all of the classics that you would expect. We're going to mention Fawlty Towers, all that kind of general era of stuff. He also has time for Reggie Perrin and that era of comedies as well. If you'd like to get anything off your chest about British comedies, then you can get us 0879 180 180. Around about 9:40 a.m. this morning, we're going to be talking about the business of sport and the future of sponsorship with Jill Downey, the MD of Core Sponsorship, and Mick O'Keefe, the CEO of Teneo Ireland. If you've missed anything from Off the Ball, check out episode 4 of Paul Rouse's History of Sport, and our feature interview from the Football Show with Aidan O'Brien, talking about his upbringing. Really interesting stuff about growing up in London. And if you're catching up with the new Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, then listen back to our review show with Kieran Donaghy, Jarlath Regan, Ronan and Owen. There's a lot more of that on the OTB Podcast Network. We're going to be back with Kenny Cunningham right after this.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. OTB Sports Radio.
Here at OTB, we're not just about sport. Our man Richie McCormick knows his tunes. Every day at midday, Richie will be bringing us his Isolation Mix. It's an hour of music to help you switch off from the workday, even if you're working from home. Stick on the mix, get some fresh air, and take a walk while remembering to keep your 2-metre social distance, of course. That's Richie's Isolation Mix, every day at midday on OTB Sports Radio. Listen on the Go Loud app or at offtheball.com/radio.
OTB AM. The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
Right, it is time for us to welcome another guest to the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, and we couldn't do anybody other than Kenny Cunningham. Last week, Kenny, you would not have been very happy with the conversation we had. Essentially, Owen and a willing accomplice in Stephanie Preisner poured scorn on British comedy, basically saying they were all rubbish. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but this is the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, sponsored by Now TV, where you can stream your all-time favourite sitcoms, including The Office, Fawlty Towers, and Only Fools and Horses on Now TV. Kenny, we thought of nobody else more qualified to talk about British comedy than you, because it turns out this is one of your favourite things in the world.
Well, you're suggesting Owen was very critical of the standard of British comedy per se. Is that correct, Owen?
I wouldn't say I was overly critical. I think there's an era.
You were, you weren't. Give us an opinion, Owen. That's why you're here.
I think that 80s, 90s British comedy leaves a lot to be desired, especially if you compare them to their United States counterparts. I do think, however, there has been a generation of British comedy that's been unbelievably enjoyable, like the Mitchell and Webb look. You've got the It Crowd, you've got Peep Show, you've got, Ger mentioned Little Britain before coming on air. I mean, that's kind of like
this
post
is
that.
Clearly a generational thing here. Oh, what, do you mind me asking your age? Grab your passport, put your passport
19.
up and let me have a look at it.
Passport. My passport actually is here. You know, I've actually got a good born in the United Kingdom passport. Let's not forget. So this is no. I shouldn't be showing my passport on. I
was too late. Actually, I think you were too late taking it down. I believe you. So, my point is, this is clearly a generational thing, because you've mentioned a few of those comedies there. I know them, but I don't know them too well. That kind of Peep Show, one or two others. I actually wasn't a massive fan of. David Williams, etc. Yeah, the Little Brit was a massive fan of that. But I actually thought you were going to make the opposite argument, Owen, when you started in terms of the 80s, 90s kind of British comedy. I actually thought you were going to make the opposite argument, because I'd have the opposite point of view. So when Tommy said about kind of comedy, he was talking about comedies, etc. I wasn't thinking necessarily British comedy. I just wrote down a couple off the top of my head, wrote down a few comedies, just all happened to be British. Now, you could throw in Father Ted and some very good Irish stuff over the years, but fundamentally what I had down there was British comedy, and that wasn't because I was putting down the best of British comedy. That was just the best of comedy that I remember growing up, and that would have been, so I'm thinking maybe mid-80s, Ger, Owen. Are you similar to me? I'm not going to ask you to produce your passport now. You wouldn't be as
42, Kenny. I'm 42, 1977.
42. So Owen's clearly south of that, although I won't reveal the exact number. He's a little bit sensitive, which people are when they get to their kind of mid-30s. They get a little bit sensitive for some reason about their age here, don't they? You've probably been through that. Yeah, we've been through that. I'm clearly at the age of it doesn't bother me at all. So I'm 48, you're 42. Owen, you're south of that. So that's clearly, it's an obvious thing to say, but that's clearly a factor, isn't it? Because you haven't been exposed. Oh, when you say you don't rate these comedies, so we're talking about, if you're asking me for the standout comedies when I was growing up, and I haven't watched these. I haven't watched Fawlty Towers. Some others still haven't. I probably haven't watched these for 10, 15 years, Ger. But I would hang me hat I would hang me hat. I slide that VHS tape recorder into the video machine and bang, I'm absolutely, totally engrossed. Now, that's not always the case with films and comedies, etc. You can go back and you think, you know what, bit disappointed in that, hasn't stood a test of time, blah, 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 whatever. But there's a number of series there, Fawlty Towers, some others do have them. For me, will stand the test of time. And those ones you've mentioned on the Peep Show, wherever the hell it is you're talking about, 10, 15 years time, people will be scratching their heads. People won't even be, they won't even be in the conversation. Nobody will be talking about them.
Can we separate these out here? Can we just separate these out? So Fawlty Towers ran from 75 to 79, right?
Yeah.
Now, I was born in 77, so I didn't see this the first time around, but I definitely remember being 12 or 13 and the reruns coming on and being completely and utterly compelled by what was happening, because I think there's only about 20 episodes. There's like 2 seasons of 10 episodes, I think.
Yeah, you're
and
right,
they're
10, 12.
absolutely, everything's absolutely sensational. There's no moments that's not really brilliant.
Because you can remember the actual individual episodes. So you think of some, you can name a lot of great sitcoms, maybe the ones you've mentioned. But I could say to you, well, give me one particular episode. Give me 2 standout episodes. You'd be like, you struggle. But with Fawlty Towers, each one of those episodes almost kind of stands alone. I can off the top of my head, and my memory's not great, Owen, I could ramble 3, 4, 5 of those individual episodes. The German tourists who came, the anniversary, Basil and his wife, Prunella Scales, wasn't it? Was it Prunella Scales?
Yeah.
Was his wife, yeah, because he wrote it with the waitress, Connie Booth. I think he might have actually married her. John Cleese might have actually, they kind of co-wrote the whole thing. But I can remember individually the rat, when Manuel's kind of thought it was a hamster, it turned out to be a rat. Yeah, so 3 or 4 or 5, these are standout episodes, so individual episodes. Now, Ger's right when he says there's only 10 or 12 made, which is the great thing, and that's why certain, I think, sitcoms have fallen down. They've gone second, third, fourth, fifth. Yeah, too long, and yeah, decent enough, but the quality's dropped off, and you get lost a bit, so many episodes, whereas these, Fawlty Towers in particular for me, those individual episodes, absolute magic. And I think that is a factor, the limited edition, but I think it's more than that. I think the quality, the acting, the script is always key. You know better than me. The script, the kind of interaction between the actors, I just think was perfect. John Cleese, Connie Prunella Scales. I think the Major wasn't yet a permanent resident there, the old Major, and Manuel, of course, was perfect. I mean, he was brilliant, John Cleese. I mean, he dominated the whole thing. I mean, he was on a lot of different levels. I think he's quite extraordinary. I mean, comic time, and he's obviously very bright, even physically to look at, lads. He's, the kind of Peter Crouch of his, but it's just his dimensions. His dimensions, you can't help taking your eyes off him. So he kind of grabs every scene, and there's not too many. I don't remember too many of those characters, because I remember reading about Fawlty Towers, because they sold the rights worldwide, didn't they? As they generally do, don't they? They sell these things on and make all their money. So they sold it to Spain, say for example. But with Fawlty Towers, I thought, how do you replicate Basil? Does Spain really have a Basil Fawlty type? It's pretty unique, John Cleese. And even in terms of Manuel, the Spanish waiter, seemingly what they had to do, they had to change the waiter, because obviously the Spanish waiter wouldn't have worked clearly in Spain. So then they get an Italian waiter in called Paolo into the show. So I was thinking, Italian waiter called Paolo and a different actor playing John Cleese. I couldn't actually see it. I said, how does that possibly work? Because John Cleese was that good, and he was. Because I'm not a massive fan of what was that little club he was in, John Cleese? Not the Life of Brian and all them lads, not that little crew. Monty
Python.
Monty Python. Yeah, the Monty Python crew, but not a lot of the stage stuff they done, their live routines and stuff. It's a bit wacky, wasn't it? Probably right up your street, Jerry, to be honest with you. I'm guessing that might have been your thing, was it? I'm left field.
Some Monty Python is really good,
right?
And some Monty Python I think is like, what I can't get it.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I'm very the same.
I don't think it's all amazing. And
yeah. So I'm the same. A lot of that stuff is over my head. I actually don't find it very funny. But in this, John Cleese in this particular series, I think is just absolutely spot on. I think it's brilliant. I think on a load of different levels, it's brilliant.
I don't think it's a generational thing, Kenny. I think Life of Brian is absolutely unbelievable. By the same token, I think Airplane is unbelievable. 2 of the best comedy films ever made. One was made in 1979, the other was made in 1980. So I appreciate the era, Kenny.
So talk about Fawlty Towers in particular. Have you seen most of those episodes on? You probably haven't seen them, so you're not talking from a position of strength. In fact, I could probably argue you're actually bluffing it a little bit if you actually haven't watched the episodes. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, in fairness, I don't think anybody has managed to avoid Fawlty Towers during their life, Kenny. On some days on RTE, when you were playing your football in the United Kingdom, Kenny, if you were sitting back home and didn't make it, exactly. If you were
that was not optional. That was not optional, to be fair. Cut me a bit of slack there.
You would have seen.
So give me your spin on it in terms of what was a good, bad, what worked, what didn't work.
I don't like slapstick, simple as that, and I thought that there was a fair degree of slapstick that I associate with British comedy of that era. Like, I can appreciate why somebody would find it funny, no question about it, and I'm not judging people here, but I think it kind of comes with the same territory that, say, Keeping Up Appearances would bring, that there is a sort of, the hilarity that ensues is often brought on a different level to how you might actually witness it in, say, The Life of Brian, which is very intelligent and very, very witty. And in fairness, Kenny, like I didn't say sitting here last week saying Fawlty Towers is crap. It was more of a generalization about British comedy, and I didn't really nitpick Fawlty Towers. It got mentioned, it got thrown in. These things happen.
But you can't generalise, though. That's the other thing that you've.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, you can't generalise. You have to examine each specific one. So you say like slapstick. So I understand where you're coming from there. So some others do have them probably similar to that. Michael Crawford in that. Some talk about John Cleese in Fawlty Towers, but Michael Crawford. I mean, this is Michael Crawford. Went on to be a massive West End star, Phantom the Opera, world renowned, etc. But talk about kind of humble beginnings. I mean, but his performance and some others do have him just like amazing for me. Even kind of on a physical level, he used to do all his own stunts and that type of thing, and just like delivery, just how he carried himself. I thought similar to John Cleese. I thought Crawford and those, and there's some others do have him again, were amazing.
I haven't seen enough. I'm surprised that you mentioned some others do have him, because I wouldn't have said, from just memory again, I wouldn't have watched some others do have him since the 80s when it was on repeats. I'm looking at it here. It went from 73 to 75. And again, there was only 20-odd episodes in this one, which I was kind of surprised by. In my head, it ran for years because it was always on TV.
Yeah.
But 23 episodes, including 3 Christmas specials. Was it that good? Because I wouldn't have said it was the same standard as Fawlty Towers.
No, in terms of the other character, I didn't think the other characters, it was his wife, Betty. Betty was in there. I can't remember anything apart from her, and she wouldn't have been the strongest of characters, don't get me wrong. Whereas kind of Fawlty Towers, you got Prunella Scales, like very good, Connie Manuel, not so much the majors, to be fair, but they kind of interacted very well, quite codependent on each other. Whereas kind of some others that were having for me was just basically him just performing, Michael Crawford. I just thought he was brilliant. But you're right, kind of club them two together. But if Owen's talking about trying to get away from kind of slapstick and kind of move it on a bit, so I remember 80s, kind of mid to late 80s, Ger, you would remember this, Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. Can you remember that?
I have a vague recollection of it, but there are clips doing the rounds at the minute that are fairly sensational. This is the high watermark, I would say. This feeds into the thick of it, which feeds into Veep, which feeds into, like, it's Armando Iannucci's kind of he kind of comes from not that gene pool, but certainly you can see how an intelligent comedy designed to explain how screwed up the world is actually has a role on mainstream TV. And I thought that was, like, from what I can see, that seems to be the clever part of that.
Yeah, it was, because that was you're right, that was the first comedy, maybe not at the time, how old would I have been? I would have been mid-teens at the time, so that was the first kind of window in for me in terms of like the whole kind of political machine, really how things operated below the surface, because obviously you had the main actor there, it was Jim Hacker was his name in the actual, I can't remember the actor's name. Sir Humphrey was his kind of, I think his permanent secretary, but he was kind of the top civil
Nigel
servant.
Hawthorne.
Nigel Hawthorne, yeah, absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant in terms of how he played the role. But that was amazing just to see. It was comedy, but at the same time, it gave you information in terms of this is how government works. You got your figurehead cabinet minister, but what's really happening below that in terms of the civil service, the games that they're playing, people getting pushed in certain directions, compromises being made here and there, but obviously on a comedy level. But that was kind of very intelligent. And when I've watched series after that, say the last 10, 15 years, say kind of The West Wing, which I got into, I loved that the series The West Wing. So that was a natural evolution for me from Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. So that was, I found that I was really engaged in that. You could mention maybe House of Cards, that's maybe obviously a bit darker. But Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, the first one for me that really kind of, yeah, you're right, yeah, really clever, actually giving you information. But I like the way they delivered it.
Did you watch The Thick of It and Veep? Have you seen any of those? Either of those?
Sorry, what was the first one, Ger? I missed it.
The Thick of It.
No.
I think you'd like it. I think it's definitely something that you could get into if the behind the scenes in politics with an added layer of swearing, an updated version of Sir Humphrey is kind of if you cross Sir Humphrey with Alistair Campbell and a filthy mouth, that's what you get.
But the script writers, that his character in particular, the kind of script that he had, how he spoke, the language he used, I mean, how he put words together, I mean, so evasive and like saying everything but saying nothing at the same time, it was brilliant really in terms of obviously he was dependent on the script which was given to him. I don't know who the writer was, but yeah, that was really, that wouldn't get too many mentions. I don't know why I thought of it, but I only scribbled. I didn't go looking for stuff yesterday. Tommy, the great Wizard of Oz there in the background, kind of mentioned to me about the comedies, and I thought, I'm just going to scribble. Anything that comes into my head, I'll put down, because I'm not going to go onto the internet and start digging out British comedy. I'd rather just wherever comes into my head, I'll put it down. It's a natural way to do it. So even just last night, little bits, I've mentioned a couple there already, but I'd put another one, even kind of so Owen's mentioned about Slapstick. Owen, have you ever seen Steptoe and Son?
No, but I'm familiar with it. Never seen an episode in my entire life.
Yeah, just have a look at it. Let me know what you think of it, because I think too that's great. I think that's great as well. The kind of dynamic between them two, father and son, and pretty much the camera on their faces inside the house, pretty much all during the episodes. But just like the acting in that and the dialogue in that, I think that's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. That's another one for me, which again probably wouldn't get a mention. It kind of came into my head last night, and I put it down. I'd put that one up there. There's the obvious ones, isn't there? Kind of Only Fools and Horses is an obvious one. Phoenix Nights is one as well, which really caught me by surprise. Peter Kay, and again, that's another one that gets a little bit of a from people when I mention it. People like, take it or leave it. But I thought that was exceptional. The script in that, just in terms of, you probably know better than me, it was more of a situation thing. Clearly Peter Kay had been brought up surrounded by this type of environment, working class environment, social club, cabaret, real community feel, that type of thing, 70s, 80s. I don't think that it was replicated so much maybe in Ireland. But I recognise the pub dynamic when I was growing up. So when I was growing up, say my mum and dad down the pub, we'd go down the pub occasionally. You'd go into the bub, you'd know where everybody was sitting before you opened the door of the pub, you'd know, well, they're going to be there, such and such, the neighbours will be over there, those friends everybody had their own little groups. But that was the pub environment, and as I remember in Dublin, that probably would have been replicated all over Ireland. And I recognised that from watching Phoenix Nights. Although there was a cabaret, there was a stage there, and there was a little bit of that going on around it. I reckon that kind of togetherness, that kind of ordinary people, and just the funny side, how ordinary people live, just kind of funny situations, nothing slapstick like you were mentioning there, nothing extroverted kind of going on, but just kind of very down to earth, normal day-to-day situations which you've all experienced. So I think Peter Kay kind of encapsulated that. He got that very quickly, and he put that Phoenix Nights down, and I think that's brilliant. Phoenix Nights.
What informed? Sorry, go on, Ger.
Have you watched Phoenix Nights, Owen?
No.
So I think Phoenix Nights, again, only 2 series, right?
Yeah.
And it's 2001, 2002.
That's mad. I'd never come across it at all, Kenny. That's a completely new one from my perspective.
Yeah, well, that was his breakthrough, wasn't it, Ger? Peter Kay, the Phoenix Knights. I'm trying to think of anything he'd done, but obviously he's done very well. He actually done a very clever little thing. Go ahead, Ger.
It's funny that they don't go into like 7, 8, 9 series the way like things do now.
Yeah, and I've heard him speak, Peter Kay, and that was a deliberate thing. He was happy. I think he was very conscious of the fact, maybe what we were talking about earlier. If you get something right and you get it to a certain level, you know, best is the hardest thing to do, but just draw a line under it and move on and say, right, I can't really better that. Let's just leave it there. Could easily make another series, make a bit of money and drag it out. But yeah, I heard Peter Kay mention that, and I said, yeah, I had a bit of respect. I said, yeah, fair play. And that's probably helped it. But again, like I said to Owen, it's the content really, which is why it stands up. And he had a spin-off off that, Max and Paddy, Jared, like the two bouncers, because he played two roles. Oh, and he played two roles, and he played He played loads of roles. He was confined to the wheelchair. Brian Potter, great car. And then obviously Max and Paddy were great, because they had that spin-off series, Max and Paddy on the Road, wasn't it? Off the back of that. And that was fantastic. I mean, that was really, I mean, obviously, I thought that was amazing. That kind of spin-off series, forget it. Like, you know, flogging a dead horse here. But that was, like, brilliant. I thought that was, Max and Paddy for me was amazing. So them two. But Phoenix Knights in particular, I thought was great. Absolutely great.
What informs you in terms of all of these shows, Kenny? Because it's like you go back to Steptoe and Son, and that is early 60s. Like, this is a long way back. What is informing your view that this sort of comedy is what you liked?
Yeah, I can't say I'm particularly obsessed. It's not an obsession I have with comedy per se, and certainly British comedy. I'll watch anything. I think when I went to the UK originally for a period of time, for years I'm talking here, I would have watched a huge amount of film and TV, books as well, actually, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, just video, cinema, I absolutely loved it. So I would have watched a huge volume of stuff at that particular time. Now, I would have kind of up and down a little bit over the years. I'd say maybe the last few years, probably not so much. That's probably bounced back a little bit. Young film now's got a bit more interest in film the last couple of years, so we've kind of cracked on again. So it's kind of peaked and troughed a little bit. But fundamentally, I've always loved film and TV, film in particular. But my TV is that period. When I 4 or 5 years before I left Ireland, and then for a few years after I came over to the UK. So all those kind of series, the ones that were made around that time, I would have jumped on board. But there's loads of other stuff. Say, even going back again, I must have watched Steptoe and Son. You're right. That wouldn't be getting churned out on BBC in the kind of early 90s, I wouldn't imagine. They might have done occasionally. Maybe it's the kind of advent of Sky on UK Go. Maybe things like that I stumbled across it again. But kind of, so Rise and Damp is another one I'd put up there. So say John Cleese, Michael Crawford, and Leonard Rossiter in Rise and Damp. Again, I don't know if you've seen it. Jerry, you would have seen it.
I've seen some of it, yeah. I know Leonard Rossiter more from the other one that he did where he walks into the sea. What's that one? I'll look it up. You talk amongst yourselves there.
But it's like, so Rise and Damp. So this is set in is the 60s in the UK. It might have actually been made. It might be made 60s, 70s. But again, he's a landlord of a big building. He rents out, he sublets it to different people. He's got two people who rent off him, but he's the character. He really enjoys it. Very kind of hyperactive character, constantly on edge. He's got a bit of he fancies the one Mrs. Jones, the famous Mrs. Jones. He's got a bit of a thing for her, and he's never offside. He's very much of a gentleman, but he's got this bit of a thing, unrequited love, and she kind of flirts a little bit. She's a little bit shy as well. So this is the kind of the underlying thing which kind of drives it a little bit. But his character, again, it's brilliant. The acting's brilliant. I mean, he was great in the theatre by all accounts. Leonard Rossiter, just read a bit about him. He had a very successful stage career. And I think you can see a bit of that with some of these people. Like, they're actually like stage actors. It's actually a craft. I'd say Michael Crawford and Leonard Rossiter is another one. Just brilliant acting on, because there's not an awful lot going on. Because when they walk into a room, there's not much there in terms of props and, you know, a lot of the maybe sitcoms today, comedy, you know, it's about more than like the individual character, what they have to say. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background or whatever. But these things, it was just the person themselves driving it. It was, you were literally just focused on them. And they had to grab your attention. They had to keep you involved. So Leonard Rossiter was another one, rising down. But that only came to me there this morning. I was eating me boiled eggs. And I was thinking, have I got enough scribbled on the back of this envelope? And for some reason, Leonard Rossiter came into my head. And I thought, you know what? That is amazing. Brilliant as well.
So I looked it up there. Rising Damp was 74 to 80. And he also simultaneously was in a sitcom called The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin.
Ah, that's right. I didn't watch
Reggie
that one.
Perrin. Yeah, and so he played Rigsby in Rising Damp. That's like, again, these are kind of TV characters who certainly survived the test of time. You know, it's I'd like to see what Rising Damp looks like. A lot of these sitcoms kind of become unrebroadcastable, but I think they probably are still rebroadcastable. The Fall and Rise of Reggie Perrin was on late night television when we were kind of late teens, so mid-90s. They showed it again on a program called The End in Ireland. So that's when I would have been introduced to that. So that's like 15 years after it first comes out.
Yeah.
I don't know if they just got them because they were cheap. There's a good chance that we saw all this TV because the BBC were like, give me the change down the back of the couch in RTE and you can have these and you can broadcast them as often as you like.
But I think you make a good point there, Ger. You've alluded to something there in terms, I don't know, something in terms of material where they haven't churned these things back. And I think you're right. So I think Rising Damp may well be an example of that. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking as well, do you remember the character Alf Garnett in Sickness and in Health? Now, he was a very good character to me. That was a good series. I wouldn't put that up there in Sickness and in Health. But you don't see a lot of those repeats. So there's obviously an issue in terms of now what's acceptable, what's perceived to be acceptable in terms of broadcast and not. Because Rising Damp, I mentioned the two people who are kind of who are renting rooms in his house. One was obviously Mrs. Jones, and it was a student, but he was a black student, but kind of very articulate, very well-spoken. And Leonard Rossiter's character, Rigsby, in terms of his language, in today's environment, would be perceived to be, that's maybe unacceptable. So I think you're right, if that's what you were trying to say, Ger, in terms of maybe some of the material there, some people would stay away from, think, we don't really want to go near that. We don't really want to put that out, maybe for genuine reasons. But it does frustrate me a little because I think there's a whole tranche of like TV, film. For me, it's absolutely brilliant. And young people nowadays, and I say young people, even their 20s, 30s, aren't going to get exposed to it for those reasons. But you have to remember, I mean, these things, films, drama, wherever it is, Jared, it's of its time, isn't it? It's of its time. It's a reflection of how people lived, the attitudes of the times, perceptions. I think that's the way you have to look at those things. You can't say, well, there was a word used, there was a turn of phrase there. Well, that's totally unacceptable. That's never going to see the light of day again, you know, on terrestrial television. I think that'd be an absolute shame. I'd like to think people are educated enough now, you know, people are well-rounded enough to know, well, this was of its time. Certain parts are absolutely fantastic, very funny, stand the test of time. Other parts, no, I don't like that. And there would be certain pieces of it today, I'd be a little bit uncomfortable. But
yeah, I'm sure you could edit. I'm sure you could re-edit them. That's like, if the stuff is good enough, there's probably a case for re-editing it and letting the art speak for itself. The only caveat I would have is that hoping that people are well-rounded enough. I'm just not sure that the evidence is always there that we have a lot of well-rounded people when it comes to this kind of stuff. Can I ask you though, so what the point of this show is to get our guests, in this case you, to put something into the OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
So this is the reverse of room 101. This is reverse.
We're not
exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So you've come with you've got a big arsenal here. There's like I've got loads. Million different things you can choose.
Yeah, I've got. I'm gonna throw in. Just let me throw a few names at you. Porridge.
Yeah.
Right. Ronnie Barker, brilliant. Absolutely outstanding. Oh, I'm just going to bounce these off you. Owen's not coming back so
I've
clean.
seen Porridge. Yeah, don't worry.
What do you think?
Decent, grand. Into the mixer, into the 1980s British mixer. Patch right.
Oh my God! Oh, the attitude! I can't believe it. Yeah. So what else? You got Victor Meldrew, the famous Victor Meldrew character. Now, I wouldn't have these on the pedestal. These are probably a level below. I'm trying to think. Even like little things. Last of the Summer Wine. If you're talking very kind of British kind of nostalgic. I remember that Sunday evening. Don't pull that face on.
You talk about shows being great today, wrapped up after a couple of seasons. Last of the Summer Wine has like 4 billion episodes.
No, it did. No, that was the exception, but that was typical Sunday night because a lot of this stuff I don't remember being. This was kind of Sunday night, wasn't it, Jerry? Again, you'd remember a lot.
Is Last of the Summer Wine not shite? Is it not? So are we not in danger here of lumping in good stuff?
No.
You were doing so well, Kenny.
No. I'm not holding it up. I'm not holding Last of the Summer Wine. I'm just saying in terms of nostalgia, that kind of British comedy, which sat really well of its time. Last of the Summer Wine. I would have been a huge fan of that, but there's plenty, just so much of that stuff around. I'm looking at a few of the bits there was one where there was 3 lads. Again, now you're not used to me here, Ger. I'm going to come for you. Do you remember the 3 lads in the hospital? They were permanently in hospital. They went around with robes on. One was very well spoken. He had a cigar. The other fellow was a little bit more kind of working class, but they were kind of in the hospital ward. Happy. HAPP.
Oh yeah.
I know. I am. Do you remember that? So
yes.
that kind of stuff. There was loads of that. There's loads of that kind of stuff.
That was all. But it was rubbish. That's the stuff I think that gives British comedy a bad name, because ultimately nothing happens. There's no good lines. There's no point to it. It doesn't teach you anything. You come away going, well, that was just like and by the way, like 12 to 14 million people are watching it.
Yeah, comedy doesn't teach anything.
It's not even funny though.
Only when I laugh is what it's called.
That's different. Don't start making the argument like, what does it teach you? The comedy, I mean, comedy is very few. You can mention maybe Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. What does Only Fools and Horses kind of teach you? You know, what does
I'm on the fence about Only Fools and Horses as an all-time great comedy show. I kind of think I'm not sure that I get it the way everybody else seems to get Only Fools and Horses.
Yeah, fair enough. I really liked it. Obviously, over a long period of time, again, doesn't help. You know what I mean? I don't know how long I play for a huge amount of time, but there's a couple of standout moments. Only Fools and Horses, yeah. You know, the wine bar, Del Boy. There was the skateboarding with Rodney when he rolled him into the under-15s skateboarding competition, won a free holiday. Rodney had to pretend to be a 15-year-old schoolboy on the holiday. So I know what you mean. So even in those vast amount of episodes, only the chandeliers, the classic chandeliers, as you know, you'd probably replace, you get your chandeliers cleaned twice a year, Jay? Twice a year. In the reception tower. So even the amount of episodes Only Fools, I still make the point, I can still 2, 3, 4 bang episodes, moments there, I think, absolute classic comedy. Similar to John Cleese, going to go back to Fawlty Towers, when he's driving out, he's having a panic, he's having a gourmet night, I think, or something. He drives the car, he's trying to get the food back, he's in a bit of a tiz, and the car cuts out. So it's the final moments of the episode. He absolutely loses it, gets out of the car, he's having an argument with the car, he's shouting and screaming at the car like it's a person, and then he disappears off screen. You can still hear them shouting and screaming, so the camera's just literally on the car. Then he arrives back with a leafy branch, and starts like thrashing the car. So he's in such a tormented state. Obviously not as funny how I explain it, but visually a lot more funnier. Yeah, so those things for me, when you got those standout moments, that for me, that tells you there was something kind of there was something special going on. And I'm going to mention another one, Royal Family. Come on, give me a bit. Owen?
I get Royal Family, and it's certainly more my thing than Fawlty Towers would be. I'll give you that. And it's well written for a very simple concept. Let's say you're talking about change down behind the sofa, you could probably use that for the budget of the royal family sometimes. So it's like it's fantastic in the simplicity of it.
Yeah,
I like it. Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good shout, Kenny. And that's almost kind of like a crossroads. Like, when was the first episode of the royal family? If I just look it up here, the first episode of the royal family was in 1998. So that is kind of like a turning point for me, where there is like I personally think, in all types of television, not just in Britain, not just in the United States, and not just in comedy, it has got better and better and better as time has gone by. I think turn of the century sparked a golden era of television, and comedy is not on an island here. I think comedy improved drastically as we got into the new century, and those sort of late 90s are the first signs of really witty, intelligent comedy, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak too much about in terms of, say, American comedy, which would be the obvious one in terms of comparison over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, because I haven't seen a huge amount of it. So I wouldn't make the mistake you made in giving a strong opinion on comedy I hadn't seen, Owen, as you've done. with British comedy. We're on a few series at the moment. So that's the big thing now, isn't it? When you're talking to people at the moment, the big thing is like, what are you watching? That's the end of the conversation before you put the phone down now, isn't it? I don't know if you've noticed that yourself. It's like, what are you watching? So everybody's kind of making recommendations in terms of, it's basically series. That's a conversation for another day in terms of some of those big chunky series which are out there at the moment, which are absolutely brilliant. But even in terms of the comedy, so say simple comedy, you probably wouldn't have said. The youngsters jumped on an American comedy, Brooklyn 99.
Yeah,
very kind of simple, very, very good.
Yeah,
I mean, I kind of shied away for a little bit. Then I jumped on, come on, let's have a look at it. Like 20-minute episodes, bang, bang, straight in there, like machine gun, but very good, very kind of, very clever, I think. Like some of the dialogue and characters are, you kind of quite get into it. So even that, I mean, that's only the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks now I've got into that. But generally the American comedy, even American comedy, I'd go back, different strokes when I was growing up. Roseanne. That's the American comedy I was watching. Alf, remember, you wouldn't even remember Alf, like that little puppet who was on. So those American comedies back, yeah, very good. But in terms of the last 10, 15 years, I couldn't give you a strong argument, because I haven't watched too much of it, Owen. I mean, you could throw a few things back at me in terms of.
Well, the whole conversation started last week, Kenny, because we were talking about the US office, and Stephanie was making the point that the US office is just far superior to the original office, and that's where this whole thing started. So it's a debate about whether or not the American style was the reason why it got to another level, which I think it kind of is. We were making the point that basically the office in the UK is set in a very dreary location, and it's very dreary people who are going nowhere, whereas there's a lot more hope connected to the US office, like which is a decent point to make. But also, I don't mind dreariness. I think that there is something to be gained from dreariness and a dark element of comedy for sure. But that's where it all started, Kenny, just for context.
But where's the breakthrough? Where you rattle off, what's the 3 or 4 American sitcoms of the last that you think, wow, this took it to a different level in terms of what America was producing?
Well, the US Office is my favorite television show of all time.
Yeah,
like
well,
including everything, including everything.
Based on, they stole that. I'm talking about original. I'm talking about original ideas.
Have you seen It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
No.
See, like I'm not even sure. Like, does that go down as a great one, or is it just kind of a bit of a more of a niche comedy? I don't know. Like, I would have thought it's quite highly rated. I would have thought that is the representation of what more recent American comedy has been. Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, as you've mentioned. Brooklyn Nine-Nine is probably your 8 out of 10, 7.5 out of 10 American comedy at the moment. That is your level, Kenny. Like that is in terms of things that you've seen. That is your level. There are a couple that kind of peak above that for sure, but that is the level. Curb Your Enthusiasm. Sorry, Curb Your Enthusiasm. Right now, in terms of shows that are currently airing, is the best comedy show on television at the moment.
Have you seen any Curb Your Enthusiasm, Kenny?
No.
Okay. Oh, you would love it. I think you'd love it.
I think you are going to identify quite strongly with the main character in Curb Your Enthusiasm. I think you will.
Don't leave that hanging. Don't leave it hanging, Ger. Don't leave it hanging.
I think you will.
He's a miserable bastard.
But very funny at the same time. It's and like certain things in certain ways. Like
does that travel? Do you think that American comedy travels though as well over this side as opposed to the opposite?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, as opposed to the opposite.
Is there a real appetite for that type of American comedy generally over in the Ireland, UK, this part of the world. And obviously, you're obviously you're a keen fan of it.
Well, I think that there certainly is in this direction, and I think that it kind of broadens beyond the point of Netflix. Like people, a lot of people will get their kicks from watching SNL skits or watching other people on YouTube at the moment, as opposed to whether or not British comedy is doing much over in the States. I'm not quite sure, to be honest. As a consumer on this side of the Atlantic, I can definitely say that I would say that we lap it up a lot more than they lap up any of the British comedies, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I say I think Saturday Night Live is chronically overrated. I think It's Always Sunny is grand. I think it's like, I would say closer to 5.5 to 6.
I used to think that
SNL is this kind of...
I used to think It's Always Sunny was that, and I gave it another chance actually during this particular lockdown, and I must say it's been sensational. But I do agree with you on Curb. I think post US Office, I think that is definitely the best comedy we've had on television. It's absolutely sublime. Get on that, Kenny, and we will do another podcast with you once you started Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, we definitely we could do a binge watch of Curb with you. The OTB Culture Hall of Fame, sponsored by Now TV, stream award-winning dramas such as Game of Thrones and Parks and Recreation, and stream your all-time favorite sitcoms, including The Office, Fawlty Towers, and Only Fools and Horses on Now TV, or Pixar greats like Inside Out and Toy Story 4. Watch whatever you're in the mood for on Now TV. Who are you putting in the OTB Culture Hall of Fame this week, Kenny?
Oh, for God's sake!
You have to pick only one.
I've had to pick only one of these.
Yeah.
By a hair. I'd have to be Fawlty Towers by a hair.
Who's your favourite character in Fawlty Towers?
You can't get away with... He annoys me a little bit. That's the good thing of John Cleese. Actually, the character actually annoys me a little bit. He does frustrate me, but I think he's a brilliant character. So I do like the two actresses, how they play the roles. But like I said, he absolutely dominates John Cleese. So yeah, it'd have to be him.
Am I gone? Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're there, Jerry.
Yeah. Sorry, incoming phone call there. Is there a single moment from the series that you've already given us 3. There's the Germans, there's the car being trashed, there's the rats that isn't actually an episode.
The car being trashed, I can one of the very few things I can remember, and you get into that like hysterics very occasionally watching comedy. Yeah, you can have a laugh and that's funny and whatever, but literally get yourself into a bit of kind of hysterics. Now that when you're kind of you're choking yourself a little bit, and I do remember getting myself into that state in that particular episode. I don't know which one it is. Actually, I have the thing here. Look, I brought it.
Gourmet, I think it's called, isn't it? You were right. He's having a gourmet evening.
The gourmet evening, is it? Yeah. And funny enough, this is me at Fawlty Towers. And I tell you what, there's something nice as well about, you handle your video as opposed to like a typical DVD. Do you agree with me, Ger, in terms of, just like, it's just a bit more substantial. It's just, the weight, it's the weight of it, isn't it? It's the weight of it. It's I don't know what it just feels like you've got something a bit more substantial in your hand rather than the classic DVD. And the fucking DVD, you got to try and pop it out. You got to stick one finger to try and get them both even. You got all of that rubbish. Eventually, it ends up getting tattered or scraped anyway. Where these things, in terms of durability, stand the test of time. You feel as if you actually. That's what I've always kept. I kept a lot of these. I got rid of them a few years ago. I got a lot of videos, but I kept about 50, maybe 50 plus. And I don't think I'll ever get rid of them because obviously there's some of the ones that I always wanted to keep. But this is the Fawlty Towers one. Oh, one more thing. Can you see on the Fawlty Tower? Oh, and do you see this was the
sign.
The sign. So there's a story behind that. So Fawlty's every episode, the last shot before they went into the episode would be of the sign, but it was always minus a couple of letters. Every episode, so they made up a silly little word by dropping letters out. But there's an anagram of Fawlty Towers which uses all of the letters in Fawlty Towers, and you have to make 2 words of it, and it's a proper anagram. So I'm going to set you that task of finding out what it is. I won't tell you what it is because I might get into trouble because it's a little bit borderline in terms of language. But you're a bright spark going. Figure out Fawlty Towers. Get your anagram and get back to me on it. See how long it takes you.
We can do that on social afterwards. Right. So one of the questions we ask every week: is it underrated? Is it overrated as a piece of art? You love this, so you're going to tell us that it is. Is it underrated? Do we appreciate? There's a whole generation like Owen tutting at Fawlty Towers going.
No, I'm going to cut on a bit of slack here because some of that slapstick, you're right, Owen, actually doesn't work for me.
Thank you.
And Basil, John Cleese's character and that, like you said, if you would describe that character to me, I'd be kind of, I don't want to watch that. It kind of gets under my skin a little bit. You know, the type of character that he is, and he's very extroverted and how he reacts. It's over the top and all the stupid walks, and there's plenty of that kind of slapstick going around. But there's something about it, just how he plays the role. I just think it's absolutely amazing. So I would stick with that Fawlty Towers. I mean, there's some great stuff there, but I would just put that just ever so slightly ahead of the rest.
So is it underrated or overrated?
But it's not. It's not underrated by people who bloody think it's great. I mean, it all depends on opinion. Yeah, you make your argument. Nobody's right or wrong, are they, Owen, in terms of this is great, that this is
no,
what I
it's
think.
wrong.
This
yes,
is
to watch it.
This is how I say. This is the effect it has on me. Yeah, we can have an argument about it, but that's it at the end of the day. I think people actually love this. I don't think there's a lot of in between with Fawlty Towers. You don't. There's not too many people I think, take her or leave it, Fawlty Towers. Some like going, rah, 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 rah. Others, this is like the best.
You should simultaneously both watch. You watch Curb, Kenny, and Owen. You watch in sequence Fawlty Towers.
I've seen a lot of it already.
No, I want Owen to watch. No, I want Owen to watch. No, he's got stubborn now. Look, Jared, don't leave it now. He's stubborn now. He's got it into his head. He doesn't like it, and he's not going to be shifted. So I'm going to change tact. I'm going to say to Owen, get yourself a little bit of Rise and Damp, and Steptoe and Son. Have a look at that, and come back to me. Let me know what you think of it.
Rising Damp and Steptoe and Son. I've got it.
I sense you're a bit open. I sense you're a little bit. He's a bit more open to that, Jared. There's no point in pounding him with the Fawlty Towers.
I've seen a lot of Fawlty Towers already. I know what the gag is.
That's exactly my point. Look, he's at it again. See,
I can see the joke. You can see the joke coming a mile away. Oh look, it's Manuel. Let's all laugh at Manuel. And on we go.
You're not going to let that go, are you?
No,
I respect it. No, I respect that. To be fair, I'm not going to browbeat you.
Poor Andrew Sachs, obviously the butt of many jokes, even into his 80s in the real world too. Fawlty Towers, available to stream on Now TV, is this week's entry into the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, sponsored by Now TV. Kenny Cunningham, you've been a gent. Stay well, and you don't actually need a DVD anymore or an old video player. You can just get on Now TV and stream everything you want.
Listen, one more thing. I want to say thanks to you because Tommy bullied me out to the garage to get that Fawlty Towers VHS video. And while I was, look what I stumbled across.
Oh,
wow. I went through over the cups now.
Classic. Look at the thickness of that. Look at the thickness. Look. That's what I'm talking about.
Have you heard about
quality VHS?
Isn't there a spin-off coming this year?
What?
Isn't there a spin-off? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest spin-off?
Not interested. Not interested.
How are you not interested when you've got a VHS of the original movie in your hand? Surely you've got to be interested.
Jack Nicholson, end off. End off.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing performance. That's probably top 5 films of all time. That's obviously taking the argument in a different direction, but top 5 films of all time for me.
Well, we'll come back to Kenny's top 5 films of all time at some other point in the future. But that's this week's OTB Culture Hall of Fame. Kenny Cunningham, thanks very much.
Cheers, lads.
OTB AM.
Part of our continuing feature on how the business of sport is going to try and reanimate at the end of all this. I'm delighted to say we've got core sponsorship CEO Jill Downey and Mick O'Keefe of Teneo with us to try and parse a little bit what's going on at the moment. Jill, I know you've spoken with a lot of different brands and produced a bit of research recently from core sponsorship to talk a little bit about what the brands are actually doing, what they're seeing, and how sponsorship might evolve into the future. So maybe you might talk to us a little bit about what the industry is saying at the moment.
Okay, Ger, so we talked to a number of rights holders, actually, so sporting bodies and sponsors, to get a kind of a more rounded view of what's going on for them. And I suppose everybody was just acutely aware of how serious the crisis is, and where sport kind of fits into all of that to begin with. And that was during, I suppose, the phase where they were adapting to the circumstances and waiting to see what would happen. But as things have gotten more serious, we've kept in touch with all of those brands and rights holders to really, I suppose, gather their thoughts as time goes on, because a day is like a week at this point, and things keep changing. You saw the Dublin Horse Show was cancelled yesterday. It's just another event this year that's not going to take place now, and has impact on for sponsors and for the rights holders themselves. But I suppose everybody is really just waiting to see what will happen here, how restrictions will be eased. And they remain very hopeful that they will see out seasons or establish a new way of working tournaments. But it's still all remains to be seen. I mean, the idea of sport behind closed doors, I suppose, may appeal to the fans and the people at home on the couch, but it certainly doesn't appeal to a number of the sporting bodies out there. So there's an awful lot yet to be determined. And I think that's really the sense that I get, that everybody's waiting to see. But also, I suppose, they will all count the cost once they get back to some level of normality, and there'll undoubtedly be some changes here.
Go on, sorry.
Does sport behind closed doors, Jill, actually appeal in a very different way, and it's a new way of thinking about it, as in you'll have a far more captive audience, say, for the first few matches that do come back behind closed doors. The television revenues will still be there, for example, and then the advertising that comes via television will still be there. Is that a possibility at all, that there is a slight different positive way of looking at it?
I think it depends on what side you're on and how big gate receipts are in terms of your overall percentage of your revenue. So for the GAA, it's not as attractive, because the broadcast deal wouldn't be as significant there, although it's considerable. It's not as significant to the admissions and gate receipts and the revenue that Croke Park makes on match day, etc. So I think it really depends on where you sit on, and how important the spectators are. But spectators add an awful lot to the experience of the players as well. I think we, sometimes forget that. It's so part and parcel of the overall experience. But I think for sports fans in general, there will be some level of euphoria when sport comes back. I think we're all gagging for just some level of entertainment and sport to come back in some way. And, I suppose just the legal ramifications of not actually playing out certain tournaments. I mean, for the Premier League, it's absolutely crucial for them to finish that out in some way, shape or form. So I think it really just depends on where you sit overall, and where, broadcast revenues, how important that is. So any sport where broadcast revenue is significantly important, I think it will it will be more attractive as an option to go ahead behind closed doors. But like, at the end of the day, no fan really wants that. They want to be able to go to matches and go to see their sports. But I think they will take it for sure at the moment over having nothing at all.
Yeah, that's exactly what Davy Fitz was saying. He was saying, if that's the only thing we can have, then fair enough. Like, obviously we all want to be able to go to games. Mick, from a brand's perspective, it's been interesting to watch different brands respond in different ways. Some have actually navigated this whole thing quite well. Yeah. They're the ones who have had deep and meaningful relationships with publishers and with sports bodies. Others have kind of withdrawn entirely into themselves. So that landscape is going to change very quickly as well when we all come back.
Yeah, and I think, look, Jill's point is well made. I think the whole industry is frozen at the moment, and it really depends on whether things are cancelled or postponed. I think just on the behind closed doors piece, I think most people, if you're given a choice between no game or a game behind closed doors, I think would probably take a game of sports. And there's so much riding on it from a sponsorship and a broadcast rights perspective. From your point, I think it really depends on where the organisation is with respect to how they've navigated this. Some industries like retail and others have actually, I wouldn't say benefited because that's the wrong word, but have actually not fallen off a cliff. There's others who have literally stopped, closed their doors, and it depends what level of crisis the sponsor is actually in. There are some brands like Super Value have done work with the GAA, for argument's sake, and others have been quite creative in terms of how they've managed to navigate this. But there's others who, will be looking at budgets and will be looking at cost cutting and so forth. And that whole debate around how do sponsors and rights holders figure this out over the next 6 months? Okay, number one, it's going to be largely dependent on whether games actually happen at all. And even if they do happen, do they happen in a different format, or is the competition diluted somewhat? If they don't happen, well, then there is a conversation around whether, you know, there's some kind of form of compromise made around the rights, or whether extra rights are given for next year, or whether there's elements of discounts as well that need to be given.
Yeah, and those conversations are not going to be easy for anybody to have, Jill. That's the whole point, that there's a level of realism that everybody needs to have, while at the same time, if you're the one left holding the bill at the very end of that realism that everybody has to have, it's like, well, that's not really how this was supposed to work out for us.
Yeah, and like, a sponsor isn't going to pull out of a sponsorship because of the lack of activity in the short term. They will absolutely have to pull out of it if their business is deeply affected by the crisis, and so many businesses are. So I don't think the lack of activity will be the game changer here, but it'll be the nail in the coffin, I suppose, or, you know, potentially could be the last resort. I think the strength of the relationship is really important here. How strong it's been to date will be crucial, and you know, I suppose the overall strategy, or the reasons why the business got involved in the sport, or the sponsorship in the first place, I think will really play a part here. But also, I think now is the time to be building the business case. I think that's, you know, reasonably poorly done in Ireland. Like, sponsorship measurement itself is quite poor in this country, and you know, it needs to catch up. And I think that's what a lot of sports brands should spend some of their time on now, is building that business case, improving the return on investment for brands, because it is significant. I mean, we all know sponsorship works. It's just it's by how much and to what degree it impacts on the business bottom line is still under question, I suppose. And the better we can answer that question now, I think the more chances sponsorships will live through this crisis. But you know, also, I don't think any sponsor wants to just knee-jerk a reaction. I mean, you don't just give up a GAA partnership, you know, in time of a crisis, because it'll be hard to get it back. So there's a lot of careful consideration here. I think looking at contracts carefully will be really important. But I also, you know, echo Mick's point. I think proactivity actually on the rights holders' part will be really key. I don't think they should wait to be asked what kind of compensation or what kind of additional benefits they can give. I think they should be proactively looking at that now, and I think that will help an awful lot as the conversations go on. But yeah, look, it's at the end of the day, it's very hard to call right now. It depends on how deep that business is affected.
I think as well, Jill, just, you know, a lot of people are focused on the current contracts in place and whether they'll be, you know, fulfilled or commitments made and so forth. I think there's a couple of things have happened as well. I think there's been no or very few new deals, and I think that means that while the industry has been frozen, if you look at some of the big sponsorship rights that are out there at the moment, things like the Lions Tour of 2021 and so forth, people aren't signing up to new deals because they're all in a mode. So that is going to have a ripple effect down the line as well. The other thing that has had the biggest impact, in my view, is outside of the agencies and all the people associated with sponsorship, all the activation spend, or most of the activation spend, has been put on ice. And will that all come back if we do have a championship, or we do have League of Ireland, or we do have a Six Nations or Pro 14 or whatever it is in the last quarter of the year? And like all the stuff that goes with that, the media partnerships, of course, you guys be aware of all that kind of stuff, ambassador deals, everything has kind of been frozen or stopped. So there's that massive, okay, the sponsorship rights in terms of contract deals may be worth something like 200 million, but there's multiples of that probably with tied up in all the activity around it. So that has also been frozen. That's having a massive impact on businesses that have an association with sport, as you well know.
Yeah, totally. And we've absolutely seen that. You can see that on a day-to-day basis. There was one thing that I just wanted to bring up in the middle of this was what the relationships actually look like in the future. And I have a friend who works in the industry who went, this is the end of all that influencer bullshit. This is the time for media companies, brands, and people who buy and sell advertising to come together and say, well, what are we actually trying to achieve here, and what is the messaging that we're looking to have on the other side of this? And essentially, it is that we continue to stand by everybody in a time of crisis. And I wonder if there is actually going to be a sea change in how we think about sponsorship, and actually sponsorship being more important for brands to tell stories about their own brand into the future.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of brands really step up in the last couple of months. And I think what you will probably see when we get to return of new normal, and who knows what that looks like, depending on antiviral medicine and what mass participation events look like in sport and entertainment and all that stuff that goes with it. I do think, though, that sponsorship will become a very important vehicle for big organisations to tell their story in the new normal in terms of how they're supporting people. We've already seen that already in terms of people using their partnerships to express and support the national interest. I do argue there's probably an element of fatigue with, we live in unprecedented times and this is what we're doing as a brand. I think it has to be credible. And I think a lot of the organisations who are keeping the doors open and are keeping people on the streets and keeping people driving buses and all that kind of stuff, I think they can tell a credible story. And I think they can do that through the vehicle. Okay, you can buy ads and you can tell that story as well. But I think having sponsorship will be a way that people will tell that new narrative, I think, in 2021. Again, all dependent on what kind of return to normality we get. I think what none of us kind of figured out is what does 80,000 people in Croke Park look like, or 10,000 people in the Three Arena look like in a year's time? That's the big conundrum. And is that going to be dependent on, like what Harris was saying the other day with respect to pubs, is just can't see this happening until we have some form of antiviral medicine or some form of vaccine that people can feel safe in these environments. And will people return to sport in that live, up close and personal space? Because sport is everything that COVID-19 is. It is collective, it's up close and personal, it's a shared experience. Like it's everything we've been told not to do at this moment in time. So will we get a return to that in 2021 or beyond? It's going to be hard to know. But I do think your point around organisations and sponsorship, they will be trying to find a way to tell their story in the new world. And I think sponsorship will be a really important way for them to do so.
It's interesting as well. It's probably of vital importance the speed at which this gets back as well, because if you say the new normal won't involve full stadiums or full arenas or whatever it may be, it's probably only until you do have a return to full stadiums that you'll be able to return to full revenue and then the full capability of spend on sponsorship and on advertising, that it's almost a little bit down the road to be able to return to the way the industry was before this all broke out.
I think, sorry, Mick. I think
no, you go, Jill.
I think it's at least 18 months away. They say that even about a vaccine, right? So, but it's the same about returning to some kind of level of normal in terms of, as Mick mentioned, activation spends, sponsorship fees. I mean, there has been a slowdown in the number of deals done this year, which is not related to COVID-19 necessarily.
Right.
I suppose it's a year where there was meant to be an awful lot of big sport. Those deals would have been done in previous years. That would put a stop to new deals being done in some ways. So, it's been a reasonably slowish start for sponsorship, even though sponsorship investment is very strong across the market. But we have seen a slowing down of numbers of deals completed and things like that, irrespective of COVID-19. And of course, as Mick said, that'll stop now. And brands won't have the kind of freedom to just invest at will. And so I agree with you that there is a new normal, of course, coming. But I think the tried and trusted sponsorships will be able to survive and thrive after this. I think it's the sort of mid-tier sponsorships will really be under pressure, and the smaller players. And I think, it'll undoubtedly have an impact on things like, women's sport had been seeing incredible momentum. But what does that mean now? Are the fixtures, there's going to be some level of congestion in the fixture list. Does that mean that the women's games in certain organisations will be pushed down the pecking order in order to get the higher revenue generating games on? I mean, it's a real struggle. I hope sponsors of women's sport remember that they came into it not just to promote great athletes, but to also, really change the future for female athletes and female sports. So, I would really urge those sponsors to continue to invest, and I'd love to see more investment come into women's sport in the future. But it undoubtedly will have an impact in so many places, and I think we're 18 months away at least from returning to some kind of normal.
Yeah. I think those new sponsors, look, we the last couple of years, and similar to other organisations we've worked at that have just dipped their toes into sponsorship this year for the first time, the likes of Circle K, for argument's sake, who've done a deal around the Olympics this year. It's hard to see new entrants to the market in the next 6 months because people are just all in this wait and see mode at the moment. I do think, look, what's this year would be hopefully some sport, albeit play behind closed doors, if that's what it has to be, well, then that's what it has to be. You will probably see, I hope, things like golf, racing, tennis, stuff where there's not that up close and personal contact return, which would be fantastic. And I think the positive way to look at this would be if there ever was a year to bounce back. You know, we would always look at sport and sponsorship as in odd and even years, and the even years tend to be the ones with all the big events, you know, the Euros and the World Cups and Olympics and Paralympics and so on. If ever there's a year for sport to bounce back, it should be 2021, when you've got an Olympics, a Paralympics, a Lions Tour, a Euros and everything else. So, you know, there is an opportunity for all those brands and all those sponsors engaged in sponsorship to come back and to spend and to get the industry back up and running again. And I think there's a massive opportunity there. Again, all dependent on all the factors that are outside our control.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's a complete unknown as to how long it will take for everything to reverse. That I think at this stage we realise that it's not going to be an automatic right, stop, turn around the roundabout and we go back to the way we were. It will just take that sort of ratcheting up, and it's anyone's guess, folks, at this point, isn't it, as to when that might happen.
Sorry. So, like, I think from a sports perspective, look, I think it is anybody's guess. I would be glass half full on this, and I do think that medicine will catch up with this. I do think we will get this under control. It's largely dependent a lot of the time on how the UK and the US behave and how they recover too, because we're such an open economy, such an open country, that we're so dependent on those, our two biggest economic trading partners, from a recovery perspective and from a sports perspective. Sponsorship, I think, will survive, and I think it will thrive, because I think it's a very important vehicle for people to tell their story. I think you look back over time and all the crises that impacted sponsorship, you know, your tobacco been pulled, you had a financial crisis in 07, 08, 09, alcohol restrictions, and sponsorship has always come through these things and found new ways and new sports and new vehicles to get over this. This is just so unique in that everything has been impacted. Everything is on ice. So yeah, look, I think whether we're back, I think the long-winded answer is that it's going to be largely dependent on how quickly we can all go back to return to normal.
Yeah, you heard even this morning, though, the officials in Japan concerned about hosting the Olympics in 2021 now already, you know, because it's about inviting people from all over the world. So even if they have it under control, and it's not under control in Japan right now, but even if they did have it under control, they have to rely on other countries all around the world and inviting people, both spectators and sports stars, in to their country from places where the virus may not be under control. And that's the scary prospect. I mean, you know, we all felt a bit more comfortable when we heard that the Olympics was being pushed out and the Euros being pushed out. But what happens if 2021 is also, you know, part of the impact here? So I just think we can take nothing for granted, and you know, I am glass half full about it too, and I absolutely can't wait for sport to return. I do think when it does return, we'll see a condensed calendar, and for the sport fan, it'll be absolutely amazing to see. But it will be tricky for brands then to cut through as everybody rushes back to try and support the sponsorships that they're supporting. So I think we'll all have to be conscious of that, and there really is only so much media that can go around to support it in terms of different types of activation. So I do think it'll be a really interesting time when it does come back. But you know, I think we're all in it for the long haul, and we all really believe in the power of sponsorship. So I think it will endure for sure. Just as Mick says, I think it's a really important vehicle for brands. So I think it'll remain strong. It just will have a bit of a dip to contend with for now.
Just on that point as well, Jill. So I think it's interesting to see that some of the narrative has moved from, you know, fan health and safety to player welfare, and I think that's going to become an issue as well in terms of, like, you know, and I saw Djokovic and others have come out about people need to be vaccinated or not vaccinated, and that becomes a legal quagmire for sports associations. Like, if you were to take the thesis that that sport will return and potentially individual sports will return quicker where there is distancing versus team sports, the big question remains player welfare and athlete welfare. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. The other one, I think, which is going to be fascinating, is because this is a global pandemic, are we more likely to see domestic sports and domestic sporting activity return far quicker than anything that involves travel? So you take the concept, the argument around, say, AIL versus Pro 14, League of Ireland versus European football competition. So would think, logically that people, and we just seen the incident with, workers coming into this country and so on, people, that whole travel between countries is what a lot of international and high elite sport is based on. That's probably going to be the last thing that is going to return. And it throws a huge question mark up around, which was at the time a brilliant idea to bring the Euros to 13 different cities. And, how's that going to work in practice when everyone, travel is what makes this virus that makes this travel spread. So, I think they're really interesting questions that I don't think there's going to be are we back in September, are we back in October? You're probably going to see kind of different strokes for different folks as we come back out of this.
I would agree with all that. I think it's going to be very interesting to see, though, Jill, to go back to your point about brands getting involved with women's sport and grassroots sport. That's a huge opportunity. If we're all going to be very focused on what's happening on the island of Ireland, assuming that there's some kind of shared notion with Stormont about what's supposed to happen. If I was a rights holder right now, I would be talking to the brands and saying, over the next 18 months, we're going to need to give a huge public education about what is acceptable behaviour at sports events. We're going to have to make sure that our players are being looked after. And these are our core messages to, it's public health, it's a safe environment, it's respect, it's all the type of ideas and ideals that we hold dear in sport in the first place, which it should be a fairly intoxicating thing for a brand to be involved with.
Yes, I think it is important, and I think sponsors will see that their revenue or the money they pay, the fees they pay in rights, are supporting key initiatives like women's sport and like grassroots, and so they probably will be slow to try and cut some of that revenue from the rights holders, or they will be advised to, I suppose, make those decisions with a degree of caution. But again, it goes back to just how deep the impact is for their own business. Whether that will attract new sponsors, if that's the kind of the line your question is going. Again, I think that just depends on the type of companies that are able to invest after the crisis, and the kind of decisions they will make around where they invest their marketing budgets. I mean, you will see other forms of more traditional advertising come back pretty strongly once the tap is turned on back for businesses, so they will start to invest in increasing their brand awareness and their product offering and things like that immediately. So it's a delicate balance here. Sponsorship is part of an overall marketing mix and all overall business mix that will need to be considered in the round. But I do think I think sponsors will be comforted by the fact that even if they're not getting the same level of exposure that they'd normally get, and that their investments are going to fund other initiatives, as long as they can weave that into their narrative and it's part of their own brand story too. I think that would be really, really crucial to see that investment stay there.
I think on that, I think you look at the traditional sponsors over the last 20, 30 years and where, the money comes from, when a better way of saying it. So like financial services has obviously been very strong, automotive, retail, will we see other industries be more active in sports sponsorship? Those like pharma, who traditionally maybe haven't been overly active in sponsorship. Will we see the big tech companies, the big tech giants who have traditionally kind of been in the background when it comes to philanthropic donations, so forth, will they take a more active forward step? Particularly if, sports are about to fall over because of lack of funding. What impact is this going to have on the big broadcasters? Are they going to have the deep pockets that they had 5-6 years ago to pay the big rights fees for sport? Are we going to see a different kind of mix of broadcast rights going forward with those who come out the strongest out of this as well? There's a lot of long-term impact. You would like to think that some of those sectors will step up and will get involved in sport because it's such an important thing from a health perspective at a grassroots level, and to make diversity, inclusion, and talk about, even just for people's mental well-being, to have sport to attend and watch. And the other point is, as well, I think, is when we get this phased return, and it's obviously a complicated enough picture, but will we see how people activate a change? And it's always been this argument around, activating at events versus activating, via broadcast or online. And the bigger audience has always been online, whereas the more engaged audience somewhat has been at the games. So we will obviously see there's not going to be people handing out merchandising or trying to engage fans at a match if there's no fans at a match. So are we going to see people invest more in broadcast partners, radio, online, print, etc., everything around the match rather than at the game itself. So there's a lot of things that are probably going to change in the next 6 to 12 months, depending on how we return out of this.
Yeah, well, look, we've only really scratched the surface of it here, but thanks to both of you for being with us this morning and trying to get a handle on this. We might check in a couple of months' time and see, as you've said, Jill, a day is a week in all our lives at the moment.
Yeah.
So hopefully in a couple of months' time, actually, we won't feel older. We'll just
if we all have a job.
Don't worry, Mick.
Off the...
I'll give you a job, Mick.
Thank you. But I know it's great to see companies putting out thought pieces and research and all that kind of stuff as well. And Core have done some really good stuff on that. And I think as of others, but it's good that people are constantly talking about this the whole time. And there's a lot of research goes into it. It's moving all the time. I think this rush to get out and to show how we're supporting the nation. I think the next piece is going to be around how we're supporting us at getting to the beginning of the exit. I think it's going to be interesting for how brands involved in sport and sponsorship are part of that conversation, as well as they've been credible as part of the other conversation and trying to get through all this and to try to help people. So, it's interesting times.
Yeah.
When you talk off the ball will obviously be very robust and will come
something very interesting that Mary O'Connor from the Federation of Irish Sport said though the other day was that there are 35,000 jobs in sport in Ireland, and that's outside of the sort of the joy and the fun and the passion that the fans have and how much we all want to see sport return. It's actually livelihoods depend on it too. I just think that sometimes gets lost in the argument overall. So it's just important to keep those people kind of front and centre when people say, look, sport isn't important at the moment. It's not a matter of life and death, but actually it's people's livelihoods, and we all should bear that in mind, I think.
Well, all this time off has given me opportunity to have a body like Conor McGregor after all this, so I'm fine. I've never eaten more or exercised more in my life. I don't know what the net impact is at the end of all this.
Zero. It's about zero at the end. Yeah, which is all, if you could, exactly, when you pile the food up and you go out of that with zero.
Really fat and really quick.
Folks, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning on OTB AM. Cheers. Take care.
Well done.
Cheers. See you now. Bye, guys.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, folks.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Here at OTB